Yeah, so Shawn, go ahead and introduce yourself, because I'm pretty sure a lot of people are dying to know.
Sure. My name is Shawn. I'm with Reserved Investments. That's my YouTube channel. I've been active in the antiques and collectibles trade since the age of 12, where I learned from very educated mentors in the trade how the actual finance goes on behind the scenes of the antiques and collectibles trade. I currently write for Antiques and Auction News, which is a weekly publication that centers around antiques, collectibles, and the markets that they serve. My columns appear in that particular publication every 2 weeks. I am also educated in business, economics, and finance. I have a bachelor's degree from Albright College out of Reading, Pennsylvania.
Okay, yeah, that's great. Yeah, so a little bit about me. My experience is kind of broad. Originally, I was a nuclear missile officer in the Air Force. The reason why that's kind of important is I know quite a bit about geopolitics and kind of like certain things that are going on in the world and how it kind of affects a lot of different things. A little bit about how it affects the economy, and then I am currently a PhD student at Yale University. I study human decision making under fMRI, and the lab I'm in is Afat Levy. She's kind of a superstar in human decision making, and one person who's in our lab, Paul Glimcher. He's a professor at NYU now, but he's one of the leaders of neuroeconomics, and I'm actually very interested in neuroeconomics. Is basically is basically you're looking at how understanding how and why people make decisions, but instead of psychology, you're putting more biology to it, and it is more replicable. But also, I've been involved in more so like the card market and a little bit of the comic book market, and also trading cards like Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, Dragon Ball Z, stuff like that. And when I came across your channel, the best way I could put it was you were making a lot of sense, and a lot of people who seem to be I would put it, the blind leading the blind weren't making as much sense because there were certain things that weren't necessarily adding up. And over the last year or so, I have met either online or in person a lot of the content creators, and some of them are more influential. And I think me doing this and then me talking to them will have them more alert to your channel, and hopefully help them make better content as well.
Agreed.
So the first question, this is a little more of a basic one, but like, what really separates like investors from speculators in sports cards and TCG and the TCG market?
Well, sure. Well, let me start with what separates basically collectors, speculators, and investors. A collector is pretty much somebody that just has a passion for something and wants to assemble items of value bought typically on the secondary market in their own personal collection. That's really all a collector is. Whether you have 5 items or whether you have 100, doesn't matter the value of those items. That pretty much differentiates what a collector is. That's the defining term. A speculator is somebody that comes into these markets. They may be a collector, they may even be an investor, but it's somebody that wants to make money over the short term. Speculating in the antiques and collectibles trade has been going on almost as long as the trade has been around itself. It's nothing new. It's just a lot of speculators, they don't understand the basic fundamentals. Now, an investor is somebody that could be a collector. They could also speculate at times. But there's somebody that comes into these markets and they're able to control their emotions. Because let's be honest, collectors are passion driven. So a collector comes into these markets, he sees, "Ooh, I love comic books, I'm going after this." He doesn't necessarily pay attention to the market dynamics as to why that comic book is selling for X price on the secondary market at present time. An investor looks at these markets from a financial standpoint. He's able to control his emotions, even if he's passionate about the item that he's buying. Most are that are successful. And he's able to pull back and say, this item is selling for X right now. I feel, based on what I know, this market could be selling for Y or Z sometime in the future, which could be higher potentially if he's going to be selling or buying that particular item, or it could be lower if he already has the item. He paid a lower price for it. Now he wants to sell into the market and capture those gains. So it's basically the mindset that's employed. That really is all that separates a collector, speculator, and investor. It's the mindset along with knowledge behind it.
Okay. So the next question is that there's been a lot of talk about there's this common narrative in the sports car market about Fanatics and them taking over and buying tops. And it's common narrative that, you know, the sports car hobby is that Fanatics will take over sports cars and save the hobby and make the products and bring more investors and more collectors in and improve the secondary market. Why do you think this narrative is correct or incorrect?
I think there's some truth to it, but it's more complex than that, right? I mean, when we look at what happened back in the 80s and early 90s, also known as the junk wax era in sports cards, it was a little bit crazy. There were multiple manufacturers making these cards. They were putting out product just on a whim. Wall Street was involved, so they wanted to maximize profits. There was a lot of corporate greed, a lot of crazy things going on across the board. And unfortunately, a lot of the people that were partaking in the market at that time were speculators who didn't understand how these markets work, who didn't understand that at some point, this market, this too shall pass, meaning all these profits that were easy come, easy go, eventually it was going to end. So I think it's good right now that we have one company that's pretty much at the helm, that's going to control this going forward, that can kind of navigate the ship. But that's also a bad thing in a sense, because I hate to say this, they're going to do what's best for them, their investors, and the people on their side of the proverbial pond that are playing in this pool. They're not going to necessarily do what's best for the collectors, the investors, the people that are out here loving the product, just want to own it, and also the individuals that want to make money on it. So that's where there's a little bit of a disconnect. If you want to compare this, look at Wizards of the Coast right now. They're owned by Hasbro. How they're handling Magic the Gathering right now is a complete mess. I mean, personally, I would go in and I would fire all of them. Yeah. I have no idea why Hasbro did not slaughter, I mean, financially slaughter that board for what they're putting out and what they're doing to Magic the Gathering. If that occurs in the sports card market, it's going to be a disaster for at least the modern era market for cards. Now, the bright side is vintage cards, we already know the market for that. So it could be, even if they would make a disastrous move and they end up wiping out a lot of the collectors that are operating in the modern era sports card market, they're just going to move right to the vintage stuff, which really, in my opinion, is if you're trying to invest in these markets, that's what you should be going after for long-term growth potential. The modern stuff is mainly for speculators. It's mainly for people to get a hold of that just love these particular products, meaning the collectors, the speculators, the people that want to have a little bit of fun. And unfortunately, some of the people that don't know any better, that are willing to pay $50,000, $60,000 for a card just because it was one in a pack, not realizing that that's just mass-produced scarcity. And that's kind of the basics that I teach on my channel. So I think it can be good if they can control it properly and they know how to run it, they know how to manage it. They actually bring in economists that can monitor the secondary market for the products they're producing. They understand when to pull back. On the flip side, though, keep in mind this is a greedy corporation, and all corporations are greedy. That's human nature. So there is going to be this intense, how do I want to say this? This intense emotion to profit from this market at all costs. And that's what's going to be bad for the collectors, the people that just want to enjoy this stuff and potentially speculate on it.
So I would say probably monopolies are like you would want some kind of competition, I would assume.
Correct. And that's what's bad in this case.
Okay.
And that's what we're seeing with a lot of these collectible card games. It's all up to them to make the decisions.
Mm,
That's why some end up succeeding more than others, and some have dark eras, if you know what I mean. What I mean by
mm,
dark eras is there's dark ages where they made a lot of mistakes,
mm,
and that's what Magic the Gathering is going through right now.
mm,
Pokemon went through that many years back, but they pretty much got better and they understand the market better. So there
mm.
is a comparison between sports cards and the collectible card games.
Okay.
I do want to give credence to that because a lot of the things that we're seeing in collectible card games right now with serialized cards, with 200, 300, $400 booster boxes that only have one pack in them of cards, all this crazy stuff. That all came from the sports market. I mean, that's
Mhm.
where they got it from. It's all mass produced scarcity. They're just borrowing from another market and they're going, oh, let's take this, throw it against the wall, proverbially, and see what sticks. That's
Okay.
what's happening.
The other question was, so like the sports card market is trending down, but the common narrative, this is been some time now, so this has kind of changed a little bit, but the common narrative is still that the sports card market will turn around in 1 to 3 years. And if you buy the dip now, you'll make a lot of money. And the outcome doesn't seem likely, but people still persist. And why do you think they're persisting?
Well, the people that say that buy the dip in the antiques and the collectibles trade. I'm going to be very honest with you. They tend to have a speculator mindset.
Hmm.
They are not on the investor side of the trade because you got to understand the antiques and collectibles trade, any market in the antiques and collectibles trade is pretty much speculative in its nature.
Hmm.
It's almost like a bubble that contrasts and expands based on collector and investor demand. That's really all it is. Because we can't attribute cash flows to any of these items because they all reside on the greater fool theory. I
Hmm.
mean, let's be realistic. If you come to me and you say, Shawn, I want to invest in an S&P 500 index fund, I could sit down with you. I can tell you these are the companies that make up the S&P 500 index fund. You can literally go through, you can pull their financials. You can see how much they have in cash flow, debt to equity ratios, PE ratios, inventory turnover ratios. If you wanted to, you could study all this stuff. There's
Hmm.
numbers behind it that matter because most of those companies, not all, but most of them pay a quarterly dividend.
Yeah.
So if you owned an S&P 500 index fund, whether it's through Vanguard, T. Rowe Price, Fidelity, pick your poison, Charles Schwab, whatever company you want to deal with, you're going to get a dividend from that every 3 months that is based on the cash flow that those companies generate. Makes
Yeah.
sense, right? With antiques and collectibles, there is no cash flow. It's
Yeah.
simply consumer supply and demand occurring on the secondary market that is completely outside the actual collectors or investors' control. So what
Yeah.
that means is if I go to the market and I pay $20,000 for a comic book, there's no guarantee that that comic book is really worth $20,000. It's great that there's data out there that says somebody paid $20,000 for it and I just
Mhm.
paid $20,000 for it. But in reality, I could go consign that comic book that I just paid $20,000 for back to the auction house. They could put it in a sale and it could go for 15,000 or it can go for 25. So what's the actual value of the comic book? Is it 15, 20, 25? And
Yeah.
that's where these markets, a lot of people do not understand this. They're extremely speculative. It's my
Yeah.
same problem with cryptocurrency. If you ever talk to me about cryptocurrency, I think it's the greatest scam ever created. I tell people that I do not like cryptocurrency for that reason. There's nothing behind it. It's just, oh, look at this. I'm scared of fiat currency. I'm going to put my money in this other speculative thing. And it's insane. You're trading one poison for another. Pick your poison. That's really what it is. There's nothing behind any of this. So when we
It's
look
funny.
at these
Yeah, go
markets, we have to look at them from the standpoint that literally most will not go to zero, hopefully, unless if you're
ahead.
holding Beanie Babies or Pogs or I hate to say it, Funko Pops in certain instances. All those markets are pretty much related in the speculative territory. But if you're buying rare coins,
Mhm.
higher end vintage comic books, vintage sports cards, items that have been around the antiques and collectibles trade for some time that people are interested in. The items aren't going to go to zero, but it doesn't mean you're going to make a fortune off them. So this concept of buy the dip comes more from speculators. True investors that have been operating in these markets for years know there are certain times in the antiques and collectibles trade where a market gets ultra hot and it hits all-time price highs. That market, even if new collectors come into it, never ever gets to those prices again, because the new collectors that come in either aren't willing to pay that high of a price for these items, or they're interested in something else. Meaning, let's say certain vintage sports cards end up hitting a new high and younger collectors start coming into that market. Well, maybe they don't want to go after those same players. Now, there's always the concept of what we call blue chip collectibles, like a Mickey Mantle rookie card. Something like that is considered a blue chip, but there's no guarantee it's going to keep going up in value year after year. Again, it's the greater fool theory. I paid this for this item. For me to sell it into the market, make a profit, somebody has to pay more than me for that particular item. And it also has to cover my costs, meaning if I go to consign that to an auction, there's consignment fees, there's commission fees. It has to cover all those costs for me to be able to make a profit. And that's what people don't realize. So I do not like the concept of let's buy the dip. In certain collecting categories, it makes more sense than others. If you're going to invest in, let me give you some examples, coins, currency that are high end. If you're going to invest in historical documents, like you get a signed letter from George Washington, something of that caliber that has meaning. Certain pieces of high end art, firearms, edged weapons of a historical significance. If you're going to buy the dip in those markets, if we ever hit a depression, you have a better chance of, or I should say a recession, not really a depression, but we have a better chance of making money when the market rebounds than some of this crazy stuff like modern era sports cards, Pokemon cards, Lego, even certain vintage toys that are considered established, like vintage Star Wars, G.I. Joe, Transformers. That's all very risky.
Yeah, I'm starting to hear people say, I mean, for a time, video games, people were into video games, and then VHS tapes, a 3DS, a DS, people
The
are building
3DS.
DS games.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. And I heard cassette tapes recently. Like, so basically, they're just gonna put everything in plastic. If it's in plastic, they put a grade on it, and it's from like somewhere in the past. There's somebody out there that's gonna try to pay more money for it.
Unfortunately, yes, that's really where we're at right now.
Okay. All right. Wow. Okay. Um, I get so the next question I have is there's this thing where early on in the card market, people were more reserved. They were only looking at like basketball cards, football cards, maybe baseball, and that was pretty it. Anything else was more of a they saw it as extremely. I mean, stuff I just mentioned is risky, but they saw everything else extremely risky. And then so there's certain stuff that has like a cult following. There's a lot of things that are more on the fringes of sports cards, like soccer cards, UFC, F1, Marvel, PMGs. And anytime I know UFC a lot, I know the sport very well, and I think that's one of the riskiest things you can put your money in. But things like F1 and stuff like that, like people get very even today, people get very I don't know, passionate when I say, yeah, this stuff has gone up a ridiculous amount. I don't really understand what's going on there. Is it that they just think um, it's just a great opportunity and they see stuff like basketball and baseball cards have gone up so much and they say, oh, this is much cheaper and these are the best guys. So here's my opportunity. And it could go to 100,000 or $1 million too, or like I don't really understand what's going on there.
Well, you have two groups of people that are entering that market. One is the passionate collectors. They
Mm-hmm.
just want to own it. They see an opportunity and they have a passion for it. There's nothing wrong with that per se. The problem is, along with that group, you have the speculators. This is where it causes problem because they see opportunity from a financial standpoint without understanding those risks that you just brought up.
Mm-hmm.
Let's be realistic. If you're going to invest in sports cards, The best way to do it, start with baseball.
Mm-hmm.
Baseball is the predominant king when we talk about sports cards. Then from there, you can get into football, basketball. But when you start getting into soccer, when you start getting into all these other esoteric sports, I don't doubt that there is a following for them. But what I tell people is use caution because it is not comparable to the amount of people that collect baseball cards.
Mm-hmm.
That example in that market. It's just like if we look at any other market, if we look at comic books, superhero comic books are where all the money is. From the golden age all the way to the bronze age. Now you can argue copper age, modern. I don't get into that. I'm just stating those 3 ages with superhero comic books is where the money is. So if you tell me, Shawn, I'm coming into this market and I'm going to collect Dell comics or Disney comics or even horror comics, sure, there's ways that you can make money in those markets if you want to. There are collectors that gravitate towards those markets. But if you're going to invest in those markets, you're better off going for what's mainstream, and that's superhero comic books. It's the same thing when we look at the sports card market. It's just like, I'll give you one more example. Look at collectible card games right now. You have Magic the Gathering, you have Pokemon, which are 2 of the biggest. Then you have Yu-Gi-Oh! You have Flesh and Blood. You have MetaZoo. You have all these third-tier card games that are coming up the pike. Now, it's true. If you want to risk money on MetaZoo and Flesh and Blood, and they end up 5, 10, 20 years out becoming mainstays of that particular sphere, meaning they're on par with Magic the Gathering or Pokemon, you could make quite a bit of money because people are going to flock to that card game if it catches on, and they're going to want the earlier stuff, assuming it wasn't reprinted a gazillion times. However, in most cases, if you're trying to invest in collectible card games, you already know the answer. Magic the Gathering and Pokemon.
Yeah. Yeah, those are even the most, if I run into people even around my age or younger, because I'm a millennial, definitely Pokemon. I remember Pokemon. Weirdly for me though, I actually quit Pokemon for Yu-Gi-Oh. Actually, I'm kind of crazy into you. Like if there's something, I collect a few things as far as Yu-Gi-Oh. But like if I was gonna have a large collection, it would probably be Yu-Gi-Oh over Pokemon. But I can't deny that the popularity of Pokemon, even today, maybe it's just like maybe longevity speaking, that Pokemon has more staying power. There's other stuff like Dragon Ball Z, that is huge, but as far as a card game, it doesn't seem as big.
No, you also have like Final Fantasy. I don't even know if they make that anymore. I'd have to honestly check.
I'm not sure. I've seen those cards before. Yeah.
There's a couple of products. I think they even have one now out based on like Persona. The
Oh,
video game, a
interesting. I haven't
Shin
seen
10,
those.
I forget the name, and I'm a video game guy too, but I forget the Shin 10 Tsunami, something like that.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I think they just make cards on so much stuff. There's a lot of like, especially for anime type stuff.
Yep.
I remember like Bleach, Naruto, bunch of stuff like that where most people didn't really play the game. They're not worth much, even with the boom. They're not really worth much.
No.
So, yeah. The other thing is one thing I look at when people talk about pumping up cards and the future of whatever cards. I look at demographics and like how many people are gonna want this 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now. Like, but how in your opinion, how does demographics I guess affect sports card investing and collecting? Just because there's not as many people like younger people into baseball in general. And it seems more in basketball and football and just other stuff.
Correct. And you're not wrong in that. There's something in the antiques and collectibles trade, along with demographics that we talk about, which is known as market caps of certain collecting categories. Now, it's very controversial because it's actually hard to get an accurate count of what the actual market cap for a particular collecting category is, because it's always changing and it's predicated pretty much on what is sold throughout that year. We try to add up all the vintage material that's sold and we try to come up with a market cap as to how big the overall market collecting category of like comic books or rare coins or sports cards is.
Mm-hmm.
So what I can tell you is one way to gauge market cap, and again, this is controversial, it's not guaranteed, it's not proven, is to
Okay.
look at what are the most expensive items in that market selling for at present
Mm.
time. Well, I
Okay.
can tell you right now, if we look at coins, there's coins out there that sold within the past few years for $19 million.
Yes.
So coins right now is one of the largest, most sophisticated, mature markets in the antiques and collectibles trade, other than high-end art, which we're really not going to talk about because let's be realistic. Most of us are not buying 1 million to 100 million to $400 million paintings. So
Yeah.
it's ridiculous to even have that conversation when you get to that level. Okay. Same thing's true when we look at coins. Most of us aren't going to buy a $19 million coin, right?
Yeah.
But it makes sense because if you look at the coin market, it's diverse enough where there's people at the bottom that just want to own like a silver coin in mint state that may have been minted either by the US Mint, an American silver eagle coin that they can buy for like 50, 60 bucks.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's people like me in the market that go after $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 coins. And
Mm-hmm.
then you have the people above me that are going after $100,000 coins all the way up to the millions.
Mm-hmm.
When we look at that market cap, it's huge. It's in the
Mm-hmm.
billions. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Comic books, we can do the same for. We look at the market for comic books. Well, what's the most expensive comic book out there? Well, obviously, Action Comics 1, Detective Comics 27.
Mm-hmm.
They're the pretty much holy grail keys in that particular market, and they sell whenever they come up for auction for millions of dollars a piece. So comic books have a very big market cap.
Mm-hmm.
Now, coming in number 3, in my opinion, is sports cards, right behind that. And you can argue, depending on what the market's doing at any given time, sometimes sports cards overtakes comic books.
Mm-hmm.
Other times, comic books overtakes sports cards.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. If I said that right. Yes, I did. Neither of those markets, though, are large enough to overtake coins at present time.
Okay.
Okay? Now, coins are rooted more in history than nostalgia.
Yes.
Okay? Comic books and sports cards, to a lesser extent, are rooted in nostalgia, but
Mm-hmm.
sports cards, because they feature obviously living people rather than
Mm-hmm.
just fake created comic book characters, that's also rooted in history a little bit. So you can argue that what's interesting about the sports card market is that it parallels both nostalgia and also history. If
Okay.
somebody wants to do a case study of the life and times of Babe Ruth or Mickey Mantle or Hank Aaron or Ty Cobb, they can do that. He's a real person.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what makes that market fascinating. Now, where am I going with this? Well, you brought up demographics. Well, we already know for how large sports cards are, there are a lot of people, especially during the pandemic, that are coming into the sports card market. And it is growing.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is it's changing. And this is the
Mm-hmm.
point where we get to that you just brought up about how not everybody is clamoring anymore for just baseball cards.
Mm-hmm.
We're going after football, basketball, maybe some of the more esoteric stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's causing this market to be more fragmented.
Hmm.
You don't tend to have that problem when we talk about rare coins, especially in
Mm-hmm.
the United States. If someone's going to collect rare coins, I can tell you this firsthand, and they live in the US, they're going to go after coins that were minted by the US Mint from the 1700s all the way up traditionally until about 1950. That's pretty much the classic era of US coinage because by 1965, you got to remember, there literally was, well, there was some coins still minted with silver, but
Right.
most coins, the government pretty much did away with minting coins 90% silver in 1965 in the US. So most people that are collecting coins, they want the precious metal content as well as the what we call the numismatic value.
Okay.
So they're going after mostly pre 1950 stuff is the stuff that has the value, gold or silver.
Okay.
Okay? When we look at, I've already brought up comic books, pretty much gold, silver, bronze, superheroes. That's where that
Mm-hmm.
money is. With sports cards, it's really interesting because it used to be for the longest time that people would gravitate towards the vintage stuff and the antique stuff. Like, obviously, I'm sure you know this, the
Mm-hmm.
infamous Honus Wagner card. Everybody wants to own
Yeah.
the Honus Wagner card. Every time it comes up for auction, it sells for millions of dollars. It's almost, I hate to use this word again, but it's a blue chip collectible in that market. Let's be
Yeah.
realistic. Well, what's happening now, you have younger collectors coming into this market,
Hmm.
and they weren't around when the junk wax era shenanigans occurred
Hmm.
that people my age saw. Like, I'm 46. So I remember going to sports card conventions, just watching dealers literally get pissed off and pretty much dump their inventory because all this stuff was overproduced. And this was
Yeah.
quite common. And that's why today a lot of it really has no value that was produced in the
Mm.
wax era. Younger collectors didn't get a taste of that. So I hate to say this, the younger collectors, when they get involved in this market, they don't understand the concept of mass produced scarcity.
Hmm.
They don't understand a lot of these key concepts where you can't truly manufacture an organic collectible. So they come into these markets and they go, well, look at this. I can rip open this pack. I can get this really rare card and I can sell it for 30, 40, $50,000 on the open market.
Hmm.
That's true. I wouldn't want to be the person buying it though on the other end
Hmm. Yeah.
because it's mass produced scarcity. So I think that's what's causing part of this fragmentation where the demographics are changing because
Hmm.
younger collectors, they look at all these other opportunities, whether it's soccer cards, they look at F1 cards, like that, all this stuff. And they
Hmm.
look at it under the mindset, well, there's always going to be a collector for that
Yeah.
because they don't have the experience from somebody my age who went through all this stuff and had people guide them,
Hmm.
or people that have the technical know-how to analyze the antiques and collectibles trade and go, well, gee, if I'm going to invest in sports cards, it's probably best to go after, the vintage cards that are rooted in baseball right now. Or if I want to take a risk, I guess I can get in the basketball cards or
Hmm.
football cards, go after a Michael Jordan rookie card.
Hmm.
But the problem is, if you price chart those cards, they're extremely volatile.
Yeah.
And that's part of the problem. And that's what younger collectors that are coming into these markets with a speculator mindset, trying to convince themselves they're investors, they don't understand.
Mm.
You have to analyze these markets properly. I get it. There's a lot of people. Literally, I was born in 1976. So
Hmm.
literally, I came to age probably in the 1990s. So
Hmm.
I remember when Nike released the Air Jordans. Of course, I had a pair. I had to have a pair growing up. And I remember when Michael Jordan literally played basketball, it was something to see.
Hmm.
It was amazing to even me. And I'm not really a sports fan, but
Hmm.
even I remember watching, this guy's got talent. This is incredible.
Hmm.
So I get the passion that people have for their favorite sports player, for wanting to own these cards. But you also have to look at the market. And if you see a market that is extremely speculative and volatile, you have to kind of understand that there's reasons why that market is performing or behaving in a way it is.
Hmm.
That's my problem with a lot of collectors coming in. So you bring up demographics, it's a good point, but that's how I analyze it.
Okay. One thing about this whole thing of like mass produced scarcity, and I've done a lot of research and listening to people in podcasts, and then looking at just how cars have been produced. I mean, from if we just look at basketball alone, which is a shorter time period than let's say baseball, from 1948 to I mean even to 2000, there's major differences. Let alone from 2000 to now, where most of the cards were kind of like bases and then inserts, but now it's ridiculous. Now you have all these serial number cards, you have low end, mid tier, high end.
Yes.
I it's one of those things where sure, maybe some of these guys, LeBron James is 20, 30 years from now be more collectible, but like how do people even sort out? Is it going to be the high end stuff that's going to be more valuable? Is it going to be the mid tier stuff? And then it's like there's so much product that's being made, uh, where you have I mean, there's at least three high end things I can think of. Let's say for basketball, National Treasures, Immaculate, and Flawless. And then there's other stuff, and then they change some of the high end stuff. So,
Yep.
like, what is your take on serial number cards? And then also, that's the first part of the question. And then also, you have these autographs where you have I guess you have three. You have serial number cards that could be mixed in with autograph, sticker, and non-sticker, and then you have these memorabilia cards where it's like part of their jersey, part of their shoe. Some of the stuff I don't even know if they've ever worn it. If they did, it's for a photo shoot.
Correct.
um, so like I don't, and people are paying literally hundreds of thousands of dollars to millions of dollars for this stuff, and some of these guys haven't even won anything. So I don't. It's hard to for even me to wrap my head because there's some people I can say Patrick Mahomes for football. Okay, won two Super Bowls, two MVPs. You know, he may be one of the greatest of all time, maybe. But like some of these other people, I don't like. How do you gauge these specific things in the card market though?
Oh, it's very difficult. And that's the problem. We're in literally new territory here.
Hmm.
I mean, this even extends, like if you look what was happening during the pandemic with luxury collectibles, like
Mm-hmm.
Rolex or an Hermes Birkin bag. A Rolex was never meant to be seen as an investment.
Mm-hmm.
It was a status symbol that
Mm-hmm.
if you could afford to put a $15,000 or $20,000 watch on your wrist, you had status. That's what it meant.
Mm-hmm.
Now you have people going out with a credit card, buying a Rolex, trying to convince the world that they have status simply because they're wearing a Rolex. It's ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
Where am I going with this? Well, we're in uncharted territory because all of these manufacturers, whether it's luxury handbags, luxury watches, sports cards, crazy things they're doing with Funko Pops where they only make 10 of them. And the Timmys, Kimmies, and Poindexters come on my channel and tell me this thing's going to be the next. They only produced 10 of these, Shawn, and 5 of them sold for over $100,000. Therefore, they're going to be worth a minimum of $100,000. And I have to say, hold up, take a step back. You cannot mass produce an organic collectible. And that ties right into what you're asking.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to this stuff, the market has to determine its value. And it can't happen over a year or two. It literally takes decades for the
Okay.
market to catch up, where we can go back in 2020 hindsight and we can say, okay, this particular item came out. Let me use this as an example. In 2020, they released this serialized card that was in packs. So it's now 2042. We have
Mm-hmm.
22 years of price history to go back and look and assess the value of that card.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is people in the antiques and collectibles trade. Manufacturers figured this out long ago. They don't want to wait 20, 30, or 40 years for an item to become valuable in the secondary market.
Mm-hmm.
For a speculator to spend his money with you, he wants that item. He wants to know if he buys that pack and he opens that card, can he sell it for a profit right away?
Yeah.
So this is where we have to switch the equation. What's going on in the minds of these companies that put forth this product?
Mm-hmm.
They're sitting in the boardroom going, how do we capture Timmy's dollars today to the point
Mm-hmm.
where he keeps spending money with us? Well, if we give him the chance to find this serialized card, we know there's people out there that will pay X number of dollars for it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost like legalized gambling.
Mm-hmm.
And again, this ties into the mindset that is completely different from that of a speculator to that of an investor. Now, a critic of mine will say, well, wait a minute, Shawn. For that card to have value, that serialized card to have value in the secondary market, there has to be a buyer on the other end who's willing to pay that 30, 40, 50,000, 6 figures for that particular item. You have to understand there are people out there with a lot of money that have a speculator mindset that aren't really investors, but it's just they're dealing with, like you and me, the average person. Maybe we're dealing with tens of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe at the low end, successful people, millions of dollars.
Mm-hmm.
People out there, they have a net worth of $50 million.
Mm-hmm.
$100,000 to them, nothing,
Mm-hmm.
nothing. So that's how you have to analyze this from that standpoint. They're just catering. They figured out the economics as a way to cater to both ends of the extreme. And that's what they're doing. Because you've probably heard this particular saying before. The only difference between a man and a boy is the price of his toys.
Yes.
Well, if you have a wealthy person, an extremely wealthy person, for what's equivalent to the average person of going and buying a factory seal booster box or a case of sports cards, Pokemon cards, Magic the Gathering, these individuals can go into the market. They can spend $100,000 and it doesn't phase them.
Mm.
And that's what this caters to. It's just like right now. I don't know if you saw this announcement. Magic the Gathering is going to be doing a one-of-one serialized card for a certain box set that they're going to be putting only in collector booster boxes. Well, the day it was announced, there's already idiots arguing over, I'll pay 100,000 for it. No, I'll pay $250,000. I'll pay $500,000. I think somebody already put out a bounty of $1 million on this card. And I'm sitting there. All they did was they came out of the boardroom, went to the head designer and said, hey, put one serialized card that looks different from all the rest, make it look beautiful, and make sure only one card goes to those packs so somebody can find it so we sell more. And the people on the other end bought it hook, line, and sinker and said, okay, I'll give you $500,000. No, I'm willing to offer this amount of money if you find that card. It's insane. But again, the people with money, they can show that off now as a trophy. So it kind of works both ways.
Yeah, there are a couple things that come to mind. It wasn't too long ago. There's like a Mark Zuckerberg card that sold for like six figures or whatever. Um, and it was like his little league baseball card that he signed as a kid or whatever. And it was like maybe authenticated with SGC or whatever. And I just found it strange because okay, you can get me to the sports cards and then some TCG stuff, and maybe people want to spend a lot of money on stuff. But it's like he isn't known for playing baseball, and yeah, I just don't. And the other thing is, people are like this. Are people gonna be like get make cards of their kids and other people's kids and try to get them to sign it and like like I don't understand this whole thing with the whole. I don't know. What was your take on the whole Mark Zuckerberg thing?
I think it's
And
ridiculous, fully. I just think that there's people out there that are desperate to own some type of celebrity merchandise and they want to make it a thing. And they think if they pay X number of dollars for it, that price is going to hold because now if they go to sell it, well, it once sold for X number of dollars. Therefore, it's always going to be worth at least that much at a baseline. And that's not how these markets work.
hmm
Because again, you have to find somebody that's willing to pay more. I think the culture that we have is gravitated towards celebrity obsession. Like you
hmm
can see this even extending like houses where celebrities grew up.
hmm
It's like the house is a dump valued at 100 grand probably in some cases for some individuals that really worked hard, got lucky, whatever. And now you see it selling for like 3.5 million because so and so lived there.
Have
It,
you heard
it's
about
it blows my mind.
Have you heard about the NFTs where
Yes.
somebody spent like hundreds of $1,000s for some NFT in the metaverse to live next to Snoop Dogg in the metaverse or something? So it was something ridiculous.
Yeah, I don't like any of the digital collectibles at present time. Digital collectibles are kind of in a bubble right now. Ever since Beeple, do you know who Beeple is?
Yeah,
Famous digital artist where his work, like I think it was called The First 1,000 Days, it sold for like $69 million at auction.
yeah.
And ever since then, people have been jumping on the bandwagon, trying to get involved in crypto digital assets, NFTs, and the like. And now, literally, the market kind of pulled back a little bit on it.
hmm
What I can tell you, just from knowing what I know, a lot of these manufacturers, whether it's Lego, whether it's Funko, whether it's sports card manufacturers, whether it's Magic the Gathering, Pokemon, they're all going to be coming out with NFTs because the
hmm
cost to produce those particular items is significantly less than producing the physical products.
hmm
They have an advantage. They
hmm
make more money on the back end.
hmm
It's just like video games. Nintendo would rather you go to the market, turn on your Nintendo Switch, and download the latest Pokemon game than buying it in physical form because they don't have to manufacture anything. They save all that money.
hmm
So a lot of these manufacturers are going to attempt to go in that direction. I think it is going to cause a backlash, though, with the hardcore fans that want the physical products at some point.
hmm That's. I guess the next question was more about there's always this big talk about cancel culture and players, celebrities, uh whether it's political or personal beliefs or religious beliefs, could like have a major impact on a player's prices and long term, despite being all time greats. Um, I guess there could be some examples I could give, like one person, maybe OJ Simpson, maybe things that he was accused of was negative. But then I guess there's certain other people, Kobe Bryant went through his stint of accusations, but it
Yes,
seemed to recover. So is
correct.
there a compass, or is there anything that can kind of you could tell, or is it just I don't know, I don't know what's your take.
Well, there is an off-color joke I could state here about like comparing like certain collectibles versus that of others. When we talk about sports cards, when we talk
Hmm.
about even historical artifacts, people that are still living, those people have the potential to do harm or do wrong or lose their status in the public eye.
Hmm.
Superman, Batman, and Charizard are never going to assault anybody. And I use that as an example just to show the differences in between those two markets. Because you're
Hmm.
absolutely right. Is it fair? And I'm just asking the question, I'm not answering it. But is it fair that OJ Simpson is looked down upon, but
Hmm.
Kobe Bryant, who did go through, I'm just going to say it, some sexual assault allegations in the past, he
Hmm.
pretty much worked through that. And now he's seen as a hero in a
Hmm.
lot of sense. Is that really fair?
Hmm.
You can't gauge public perception.
Hmm.
That's the problem. And that's what's hard to gauge when we're dealing with artifacts that are related to people that are still living and breathing.
Hmm.
Look at Bill Cosby. Did anybody ever expect, growing up, I watched The Cosby Show every week. When those allegations first came to light, I'm like, is this real? But then when you look at the evidence, it does lead you to believe, and the way that he acted surrounding those allegations, okay, potentially this is who he is. He's not the person that I
Hmm.
thought he was. And literally, I'll tell you, as an 80s child, my heart broke.
Hmm.
I mean, every week. Then I remember when Fresh Prince of Bel Air came out. That was an awesome show in the
Hmm.
90s. I watch all these shows. And if you look at like Will Smith with the Oscar slap,
Hmm.
that was kind of surprising too,
Yeah.
seeing as the character that he played on Fresh Prince, and he always had this clean cut, you know what I mean, persona.
Yeah.
You're wondering, how did this play out? So my point is, any living being, they're human. After
Hmm.
all, they're gonna make mistakes. I don't want to say that what Cosby did was a mistake because if he allegedly did that, I think he was found guilty, if I recall correctly.
Yes.
That's something more where that's a problem, meaning you're just an evil person at that
Hmm.
particular point. So I'm not trying to compare Cosby to Will Smith in this regard, but I'm
Yeah.
just trying to show that you can't always predict how people are by their nature just because you're a fan of their work
Hmm.
or you relate to a character they play. So that's the issue we have when we invest in sports cards, even historical documents from people that are still alive, books that are written by authors. Look at the controversy surrounding J.K. Rowling,
Oh yeah.
her views, Harry Potter. There's a lot of people I know that used to love Harry Potter. They won't touch it now. They're out of that market.
Wow.
I knew people literally had signed first editions of Harry Potter and said, I got to go in the market and sell these. Don't get me wrong, they did very well because
Yeah.
there's other people that are still looking for that stuff. But she's considered a very controversial figure because of some of the statements that she made.
Hmm.
So there's no guarantee that if you're buying into something from somebody who is still alive and has
Hmm.
status, that the way they're viewed now is going to continue into the future. Any given thing can change that.
Hmm.
So it is a risk. That's why, like, if you come to me and you say, Shawn, I want to invest in sports cards, go after players that are dead, man. Best advice I can give you. Seriously, Willie Mays, Babe Ruth, Mickey Mantle, we know, no allegations are going to come to light 50 years
Yeah.
later, I don't think. You know what I mean?
Yeah. What's your thought process on people who buy like sports card figures? I don't want to, almost in a sense like they look, oh, they're super old, they're in their 90s, they're gonna pass away soon. It's this effect where if someone dies, their sports cards go up or whatever. I'm pretty sure. I don't think people are like willing to admit it, but I'm sure there are people out there looking at the oldest legends, and he could croak soon or something, and they're like, all right, let me take this risk here. Um, I because that's like an ethical thing. I don't know how people. I don't know what people you've met thought about this, or I don't know if this is something anyone's ever raised.
Well, it's kind of like the art market, isn't it? I mean, I'm sure
Oh
you've
yeah.
heard the saying where the only valuable artist is a dead artist. That
Yeah.
used to be the saying in the art market. And now we have all these contemporary artists that are still alive and young and still producing art. Look at Banksy,
Hmm.
and their pieces are selling for millions of dollars.
Hmm.
But if you're going to buy into an Andy Warhol's dead.
Hmm.
We pretty much know how many pieces are out there, right?
True.
I mean, I'm assuming there's not going to be a cache of Andy Warhols found anytime soon,
True.
unless if it's coming from a collector that's been a long time collector. Same thing's
True.
true when we talk about Monet, Picasso, any of the modern masters. So when we apply this concept though to sports cards, it does get a little bit kind of insane. I think it's taken to the next level.
Okay.
And I really don't agree with it because most sports cards, most memorabilia that is truly valuable was produced in that person's prime as a player.
Yeah.
Now, you can argue, well, Shawn, if they're dead and buried, they can't autograph anything going forward.
Yeah.
But some sports greats, much like if we look at in the comic book world, Stan Lee, they signed everything.
Yeah.
Let's be realistic. Another few years of them living, it's really not going to affect anything because they already signed almost everything that they came in contact with. I mean,
Yeah.
I know you probably know this. Back in the 90s, even, there were a lot of sports stars that were going to conventions and they would get paid handsomely for their autograph. And they would just sit there, sign, here you go, sign, here you go. Like, I didn't understand. Your hand isn't, I mean, you're sitting there signing thousands of autographs all day, every day. It's insane to me.
They
So,
have that. Not to cut you off. That I've seen that because I've gone to Sports Card National, and they have like players signing, and it's very expensive, and they're just sitting there signing everything. Yeah.
it's insane.
The 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 other question, this is going to change a little bit. So, what is your opinion on people selling sports card investment picks and subscriptions? There's a lot less people doing that now. There's still a few people doing this. Like, what's your opinion on that?
Here's the problem that I have with this. Okay. And I tell people this. If anybody in the antiques and collectibles trade is trying to sell you a course, even a consultation, like I offer consultations for analyzing collections, getting in the minds of collectors and investors. And they will sometimes ask me, well, Shawn, what should I put my money into? I can't answer that question for you. No one
Hmm.
can. If somebody says they can, they're either lying to you, number one.
Hmm.
They either have tremendous insider information, which boggles my mind because if they would keep it to themselves, or they would team up with a grading company, an auction company, or a manufacturer and utilize it that way. Or number three, they're a market manipulator,
Hmm.
meaning they're hoping people listen to their advice, they come on the market, and they all buy these particular products. So guess what? When the price hits an all-time high with everybody buying it, they can dump it.
Hmm.
So I do not have a lot of good vibes towards a lot of these people that claim, well, let me tell you what you should be buying. Because let's be realistic. If everybody went after that particular item, the price would jump up because
Hmm.
collectibles market works supply and demand. That's all it
Hmm.
is. If I came on YouTube and I ever did a video where I said, you know what, this comic book over here, let's call it comic book X, is undervalued. You should be buying this book. Well, even if I only got 10,000 views on that video, if 5,000 people went in the market and tried to buy that book in the condition and grade that I'm stating, price is going to shoot right up.
Yeah.
That's why there's an excellent book. I think I have it somewhere here, written by Harry Rinker, called Insider's Guide to Manipulating the Antiques and Collectibles Trade. It's pretty much, that's not the exact name. I have it on my bookshelf. I've said it in
Hmm.
other videos. And basically it goes through, it was written in the 1980s and it reads like stereo instructions. It's like the most boring book. No offense to Harry Rinker, But how do you write an exciting book in the 1980s about manipulating the antiques and collectibles market? You really can't.
Yeah.
It reads like stereo instructions. And the book is very hard to find on the secondary market today because a lot of people have an interest in reading that book. Let me just. Oh, here it is. It's just a book.
Okay.
How to make
Yeah.
the most of your investments in antiques and collectibles. The first insider's guide to manipulating the antiques and collectibles markets to maximize your investment. And I think they only ever did one printing of it. And the book is
Okay.
quite rare. But if you read it, it really opens your minds as to how unregulated and risky these markets really are, especially in the year of YouTube, in the age of
Mm-hmm.
TikTok, in the age of online auctions, in the age of collecting forums, Facebook groups. Anybody can go out there and peddle this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to get arrested. Nothing's going to
Mm-hmm.
happen to them. They're not going to even get slapped on the wrist. It's not like you're doing it with stocks or securities.
Mm-hmm.
These are unregulated assets. So anytime someone tells you, let me show you what to buy, be very hesitant of that, especially if it's a subscription service, especially if they're getting paid for it. That's my opinion.
Okay. The other thing is, so what's your opinion also, because this is another thing people kind of be trying to sell. What's your opinion on these price data tools people subscribe to invest or flip cards in the market? You know, I don't have to mention specific names of people, but there's certain products, I don't know, card ladder, card hedge, market movers. I'm sure there's more out there where people are looking. I feel like it's mostly like YouTube. I'm not YouTube, but eBay data
Yes.
that people are literally just paying for. And maybe we could outsource and find stuff from PWCC or PSA or other places that do longer term. But it still seems like there's quite a bit of people who are paying for these like subscription services and looking at the market and using this to quote unquote invest or speculate. So what's your opinion on this stuff?
Okay, there's nothing wrong if all some of these companies are doing, and some of them are, if it's just providing pricing data.
Mm-hmm.
Like in the comic book world, you have GP analysis, you have Go Collect. The coin world, there's PCGS Coin Facts, which is actually 100% free.
Mm-hmm.
You can also even register for a free account in most auction sites and just look at pricing data for certain collectibles. You just type it in and it comes up free of charge. If all they're doing is providing a set source of pricing data that just gives you an understanding of what's selling and what's happening in the market, I have no problem with that. That's fine.
Mm-hmm.
That is a good service to provide consumers and investors and collectors, provided that they understand that they have to have an understanding of where that data is coming from. In other
Mm-hmm.
words, if we look at GP analysis, I'll give you a prime example for comic books. Comic Link does not report in to GP analysis, to my understanding. Comic Link is a major exchange where comics are bought and sold. So if you're going to go by the information strictly listed in GP analysis, in the back of your brain, a siren should be going off that, hey, this isn't including comic book data from Comic Link, which is one of the
Mm-hmm.
largest exchanges. So they all have limitations in my
Mm-hmm.
experience, but there's nothing wrong with what they do. The problem is some of them go a little bit too far, and some of them try to provide like what we call in the financial world stock picking advice.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, this item for the last couple of months or years sold between this price point. Now it's trending either over here, it's trending lower, or it's trending higher. This is where you should buy it at. I am completely against that. Because in the antiques and collectibles trade, and even in the stock world, if we talk finance, you can't really predict that.
Mm-hmm.
That is complete hogwash. I know I'm aging myself by using that term, but again, I'm in my 40s. Give me a break.
Yeah, so I one thing that kind of came to my mind is there's certain tools where they do these all-time highs or whatever, and also the weirdness of private sales because
Yes.
they'll do the very high sales But obviously, they're not. If they find, I don't think they're. If they find out about a very low sale, they're not gonna be like, "Oh yeah, this
They
sale
admit
is
them.
low."
Yeah, they admit them. Well, here's the problem that I have with private sales. If the sale's private, how do we know it actually took place?
Oh yeah.
And that's always my question. Okay. And this can even extend to eBay. Like you'll
Mhm.
sometimes see something stupid that listed on eBay, and you know damn well that's not the price it's sold for.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? When you're searching sold and completed listings,
Hmm.
it's market manipulation in most cases, or money laundering, one of the two.
Yeah.
It's not a real price, though. You can just look at it and go, nobody paid that price for that item. Like people
Yeah.
will do it with a Beanie Baby. People will do it sometimes with a legitimate collectible, like a comic book or a sports card. And now it gets the sales data out of whack. Because let me give you an
Yeah.
example. If you have like 8 items and all 8 of them in 9.4, let's just use,
Hmm.
sold for between 10 and 15,000, and this one outlier sold for like $33,000. Is that really realistic?
Hmm.
No, it's not. So you kind of have to admit that one. And that's also what can confuse some of these algorithms like GP analysis. Because if you're looking for an actual average, 90-day moving average, a sale like that that gets picked up by that algorithm, it skews the data.
Hmm.
So that can be a downfall to these sites. You do have to apply critical thought to all
Hmm.
of this information that's out there, whether you pay for it or not. And unfortunately, in the antiques and collectibles trade, especially in present time, we're seeing a lot of people don't have critical thought. They're not capable of critical
Hmm.
thinking. I mean, I don't know. I'm not I'm trying not to be mean, but I'm just saying a lot of these particular individuals that are coming into these markets, we saw that during COVID.
Yeah.
I mean, the government gives these individuals $1,200 at least on 3 separate occasions, and they buy the dumbest things. At least the people that got the PPP loans. Don't get me wrong, I'm against the PPP loans because they were wiped clean. But at
Uh,
least the people that got the PPP loans, they had a brain in their head and they went after the true vintage stuff. Like I
yeah.
had people coming to me, I'm a consultant, and I had people literally calling me up going, Shawn, I'm buying an amazing fantasy 15 on the government's dime. And I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? The first time I had a call like that, and the dude's like, what do you mean? They gave me $250,000 that I don't have to pay back. And I said, well, at least you're intelligent enough to go after an amazing fantasy 15, aside from some of this stupid speculative modern crap that's selling for high prices right now.
Yeah. That's that's the other thing I'm kind of worried about is all these market tools have these indexes, and
Yes.
then they almost use it like the S&P 500. And I guess there are a couple things that come to my mind is like, one, I'm not getting paid a dividend, right? Like at least if you put in S&P 500, we mentioned before, you're gonna get some kind of dividend. And you know, you can't even invest in these indexes. That's the other thing. And
It's
then a
difficult.
lot of these indexes, I assume, like, I guess it's very hard to even know because most people I talk about, even some of the bigger creators, um, they'll be honest. They're like, I don't really know how this index is made.
Oh,
So
I can
I
tell you
was,
the history of it. I can tell you the history of it. During the 1980s, when the art market started going insane, a
mhm,
lot of these major auction houses like Christie's, Sotheby's, Bonahans, all these high-end auction houses wanted to get into the high-end art market. And of course, they
mhm,
had the clientele to do so. So what
mhm,
they would do is they would put together these art indexes and they would put them forth and they would say, if you invested in a basket full of blue chip art, you would have made X number of dollars if you would have held it for X number of years and you would have bought
mhm.
these artists. Now, I don't know. Are you familiar with like companies like Masterworks IO? There's
Yes,
Rowley.
yeah, I was gonna ask you about those companies too. But yeah,
We'll get to that. Okay, I'll save then the full answer for that. But I will say they use a similar format where they present a lot of these top tier collecting categories as a can't lose investment.
yeah,
And what happens is what a lot of these companies do. Here's the problem with indexes in the antiques and collectibles trade. Let's say that a certain artist falls out of flavor, or if we're
mhm,
talking sports card, a certain player falls out of flavor and it's part of that index.
mhm,
They'll simply remove that player or that piece of art from the index. And in all honesty, in certain cases, not in all, they don't have to tell anyone.
Uh,
So now it skews the number back up to where they want it to be.
mm-hmm.
Now there is a rare coin index, believe it or not. I think it's called the PCGS 3000.
Okay. Okay.
And if you look at the coins in that index, it's actually not a very good index to start with because
Mm-hmm.
they put a lot of low value common coins in it, along with a lot of high value coins.
Okay.
So what happens is if the high end market's doing well, it drowns out the low value coins.
Mm-hmm.
If the low value market's doing well, it could potentially skew the numbers of the high value coins.
Mm-hmm.
So there's been a lot of criticism towards that index over the years, especially
Mm-hmm.
given the fact that in the mid 1980s, the rare coin market was in a massive speculative bubble.
Mm-hmm.
So people claim there's no use to even utilize this index anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So I do not like indexes in the antiques and collectibles trade because, again, you're absolutely right. You can't potentially invest in them. It's impossible.
Mm-hmm.
Because if companies come into the market and they do offer some type of fractional share investing in that index, they wrap it with management fees. It's a
Yeah.
illiquid asset, number two, and it's very hard to get your money out of that investment as listed by them. There's an excellent video out there if we want to talk about Masterworks. Do you know who the Plain Bagel is?
That sounds familiar.
Plain Bagel is an investment guy who's on YouTube and he has like 650 some thousand subscribers if you look him up. He
Okay.
did a video on Masterworks and he really did an in-depth analysis and he tells you all the risks. And pretty much he comes to the conclusion that he himself, in his expert opinion, would not invest in Masterworks for that reason. And I've been saying this since the beginning with all these companies like Rowley, Master. I'm trying to think of all of them. I think there's Otis. There's so many of them now. You're basically taking,
Gigs. Okay.
yeah, you're basically taking an illiquid asset, which is what the antiques and collectibles trade is. You're divvying it up, making it even more illiquid. Then you're wrapping management fees
Mm,
around it. And you're also making it harder to sell on the secondary market. Because let's be realistic, somebody like me that wants to buy a rare coin, I'm going to go buy a rare coin. I'm not
yes.
going to pay you shit for your shares just because you tell me you own piece of a 20 million, whatever the hell that means. You own a
Yeah.
piece of a $20 million coin. Am I supposed to hang it on my wall? I mean, it means nothing to me.
Yeah.
And that's what people don't understand. I think they get caught into the hype. And again, they make bad decisions as a result.
Mm,
And
okay.
that's why, like, I actually lose respect for a lot of people. Like, I'll watch some of these high profile YouTubers
Mm-hmm.
and they'll like pitch like Masterworks, they'll pitch all these other companies. And I'm like, what are you doing, dude? You're smart enough to know that this probably isn't the wisest thing for every Tom, Dick, or Harry on the street to invest in. I mean,
Yeah.
in my opinion, the average person does not need to have exposure to fine art in their portfolio. I'm going to be very honest. That's ridiculous.
Yeah. I think yeah, I remember I was watching a lecture, maybe it was like Jordan Peterson or something. He was like, "Yeah, you should be investing in art or whatever." And I'm like, "What?"
Yeah, it doesn't fit. It
Interesting.
yeah.
Um, yeah, yeah. There's a lot of that stuff. Um, I haven't checked it because stuff has significantly gone down since the whole with interest rates rising and everything.
Yes.
Um, yeah, I okay. That's really good to know. Uh, so I guess the next question is: do you think the rise and popularity of anime, video games, and non-sports cards in the last 20 years help, hurt, or not affect the demand for sports cards in the future?
Well, let's look at it from this standpoint. If somebody's going to collect something, they only have a limited amount of funds to put into their preferred collecting categories.
Mm-hmm.
Again, going back to market caps, a lot of people growing up in the last 20 years are gravitating more towards, again, anime, video games, collectible card games, vintage toys to a lesser extent, but items of that nature, items that
Mm-hmm.
they know, right? So if they're going to go into the market and let's say that they end up becoming a lawyer, a doctor, somebody that makes close to six figures or more.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's say every year they want to spend $10,000 to $20,000 on collectibles. I've
Mm-hmm.
seen people do this. if they have a attachment to video games, anime, collectible card games, and the like, and maybe they like sports cards,
Mhm.
or maybe they like rare coins, most of that money is going to go towards those more speculative collectibles
Mhm.
because they have an emotional attachment to them.
Yeah.
So it is eventually going to affect the trade. The
Mm.
problem is, and this is what I argue on my channel, as people age, they change.
Yeah.
So even though you may have grown up with anime, with video games, with collectible card games, and maybe at the age of 30, you're actively collecting those items. If
Mhm.
you're a true collector, you're somebody, I always say on my channel, a collector is born, they're not made.
Mhm.
You're a true collector, you're trying to invest in these items. At some point, you may cross over and you may go, I have a room full of video games. I have all this stuff. It's really not satisfying.
Mhm.
I would rather go after a rare historic coin or
Mhm.
a historical document or a sports card from the 1950s or earlier, something that I really can relate to, something that has a lot of value that I
Mhm.
know I can sell into the market 10, 20 years. The market's probably going to still exist.
Mhm.
So that's why me being a consultant, what'll happen is I get contacted by people in their 50s or people in their 60s that go, I only have a couple of years left of collecting because usually when these people get into their 70s or 80s, they're going to start selling the collections or they're going
Mhm.
to, give them to the younger generations if they
Yeah.
want them, either or. They'll come to me and they'll say, Shawn, I want to sell this collection and I want to go into this.
Mhm.
And that's why I tell people, if you go into the market for higher end antiques, historical documents, uh, coins, currency, even sports cards, there's most likely always going to be a market there. It's not guaranteed because as people age, their interests change.
Mhm.
And they tend to let go of a lot of this stuff that maybe they liked when they were 10 or 12, and they tend to go into different directions. That does
Mm.
happen. I know people that literally didn't get into high end art until they hit the age of 60.
Wow.
They've never collected art before. And these people are spending $100,000 or more per piece of art they're buying, which is high risk. Let's be
Yeah.
realistic. Now, part of that is also due to the fact when you're young, you're not going to have money to spend $100,000 on a painting or a rare. Obviously, you have to be older to be able to do it.
Yeah.
But part of it is also people realize, oh, this is rooted in pop culture. I can get something over here that's truly historic or something
Mhm.
that may have a better shot at standing the test of time.
Mhm.
A lot of comic book collectors do this. As they age, they may have collected Bronze Age comics, Copper Age comics, even some modern era comics. Maybe they have some Silver Age keys. And eventually they'll come to me and go, Shawn, I want to buy a mega Golden Age key. What's your
Mhm.
recommendation? And I tell them, are you willing to give up all these other books that you accumulated to get that
Mhm.
one mega key? Most of them say yes, no problem.
Mhm.
And to be honest, if they're going after a golden age key, they weren't alive when that particular book in most cases was produced. It was a
True.
completely different era. I mean, I could do a whole video on the differences between golden age comic books, what they were about, how the superheroes were viewed, how they were drawn, what they were fighting against versus that
Mhm.
of silver age versus that of bronze age. It's very interesting when we look at the history of comic books for that reason.
Mhm.
So for them to be going after a golden age book that may have Nazi references in it, inaccurate references of unfortunately the Japanese people because of what happened with the bombing of Pearl Harbor at that time.
Yeah.
It's really not politically correct, to be fair,
Mhm.
but it's something that they want to own because they perceive it as, well, gee, this is the origins of superheroes. It's worth collecting. And they're right. So that's something that I always try to tell people, like on my channel, your perspective is going to change. There's an excellent saying out there. I don't know how young you are, but if a man who's
Mhm.
20, if he looks at the world the same when he's 40 or when he's 60, he didn't live. He didn't do anything. He doesn't
Yeah.
have the capacity to understand change, self awareness, self actualization.
Mhm.
It's the same thing with collecting. That's why all these people that argue with me on my channel, Shawn, you're against Funko Pops, you're against this, you're against that. It's because, again, I've been doing this since the age of 12. So
Mhm.
I'm able to go back in my memory and look at things the way they were, how we got to here. And I realized there's a lot of collecting categories that didn't make it. And a lot of
Mhm.
people were putting tons of money in these collecting categories. And it wasn't all Beanie Babies.
Mhm.
It was collecting categories that actually should have gotten off the ground, but they didn't.
Mhm.
Ask anyone how they did if they invested in Atari games over the long term. Back in the 1990s, there was a massive speculative bubble in Atari 2600 games.
Mhm.
And I state this, I made a lot of money selling to these people. Today, you're not getting all that money out of Atari 2600. The market is not there. The people that collected it moved on. They're not
Mhm.
interested. So,
Yeah, I can actually see that in myself because I'm 29 now. And yeah, I think tastes change, and I can definitely see myself. I don't have that much stuff, and then some of the stuff I do have, like as an investment, I actually like vintage sports cars more than anything. Like Jim Brown rookie
okay.
cards. Like I have an auto and like a PSA 7. And I like Bill Russell rookie cards. Some baseball stuff because I'm from Mobile, so I like Hank Aaron.
Okay.
Um, but like there's other stuff like real video games and stuff like that, but it's not something. Well, one, I can't play it, so it's just one of those things where I guess I had like a small little phase where I did have a bunch of video games, and I kind of sold them off during the whole market craziness. I only have like one PlayStation 1 video game that's never been open. But like, so I do kind of see that, and I don't think as far as a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh and Pokemon stuff, because most of my money, to be real, is going to be going into SP 500, and I may use a VA loan to buy a house or whatever sometime in the next within the next 3 to 5 years. So it's one of those things where tangible assets and or just like more traditional assets just make more sense. And then the whole nostalgia kind of a thing. Eventually, I feel like you do move on. So I agree with that.
Correct. Nostalgia is a bubble. That's
Yeah.
really all. It's actually a lie if we get to the psychology of it, but I won't bore you with that. I've done videos on that where like people don't realize there's a reason why you are obsessed with things from your childhood. And usually it has to
Hmm.
do with what was going on in your childhood at that particular
Hmm.
point in time. That's why they've done studies on this where they claim, like, I hear collectors tell me this all the time. Well, whatever you liked at the age of 12 is what you're going to like growing up. That's not always true. It doesn't
Yeah.
work that way. There's something that happened to you at the age of 12 that caused you to kind of almost be stuck in that time period where you gravitate towards that stuff.
Hmm.
And that's why like this kind of goes in the trajectory then of psychology where it's
Hmm.
like maybe you should speak to a therapist about that, you know? I'm not equipped to help you with that, but most people that really get obsessed with nostalgia, I hate to say this, in my experience of dealing with people in the antiques and collectibles trade, if they're really obsessed with it, they
Hmm.
have a lot of issues, emotional attachment issues. Something happened to them.
Hmm.
This really came to a head. I don't know if you saw this news article. There's a man that grew up in around the Detroit area who had this
Okay.
massive comic book collection that was
Okay.
just revealed, and it turns out his son discovered it,
Hmm.
and he had Asperger's syndrome. It appears that he had a lot of problems. He had a
Hmm.
lot of issues, but he loved collecting comic books.
Hmm.
Usually people that amass collections like that, I hate to say it, that's the norm. There's something that happened to them or they have problems relating with people. It's we call it in the trade, I hate to say this, we refer to them as shut-ins.
Oh.
Everybody in the antiques and collectibles trade at some point, I'm treading carefully here, has gotten a call from the old, weird, eccentric guy that literally lives in a house, and you go in the house, and either it's all garbage, he's a hoarder, and he thinks everything's valuable, or on the other end of the spectrum, he has like a stash of stuff worth like 6, 7 figures that you're just like, why does this guy live like this? If he sold this stuff, he would have all this money. And you
Yeah.
try to help these people, even on that end of the spectrum, it's like, dude, if you sold this stuff, you could get like a better, you know what I mean? You could
Yeah.
actually
Yeah.
live, get help, do what you want to do, and they won't let go. It just blows me away.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. That. That's interesting.
Very much so.
Yeah.
I mean, I've even seen it with some crazy stuff. I can tell you some stories. It's like you hear stories on the news, like a vintage toy collection that comes to market that's worth like 6, 7 figures, or comic
Uh-huh.
book. But it's also like macabre items, like really strange curiosities from like the Victorian era. I knew a guy that collected Ouija boards, but the collection
Okay.
was extremely valuable. I knew another guy. Now, this isn't really too esoteric, but like antique bottles. That's a
Okay.
big one when you go up to the Northeast.
Okay.
Huge collecting market for vintage antique bottles. But this person had like poison bottles, and he was
Poison ball?
obsessed. Yeah, poison bottles, because they
Okay.
used to. I don't know if you're aware of this, the history of America. A lot of people were illiterate back in the day.
Yeah.
When companies started manufacturing products that might be seen as like rat poison or lye, they would put it in a glass bottle, and they would give the bottle a unique feel or texture to it, or a look to it. So if you were rummaging around and you couldn't read that it was lye or it was rat poison, if you would feel the bottle, you would know then this is poison.
Oh,
Some of the
wow.
bottles
Okay.
were even uniquely shaped like skulls or coffins. I have a couple in my collection. I should have brought them down here. I didn't know we were going to talk about this, but I
Oh,
could show
okay.
you some because they're sitting in my living room. That's how weird I am. But there are people that really collect this stuff. Well, this person had like an extremely valuable collection of poison bottles, and he lived in like this $40,000 shack. And the bottles that he had, literally at auction, just the collection, we appraised it, would be like 250 grand. And he didn't care about the money. He just wanted to own those bottles. It's insane what people do to themselves. Like it almost is like the antiques or collectibles serve as a security blanket. If you get the
Yeah.
analogy, it's very weird to me, but there are people like that that operate in these markets. Sorry, I
Mm.
know I'm going off on a tangent with this, but I just find it fascinating.
No, that is fine. Yeah, yeah. One of the things in one of my classes I learned about is like certain diseases and disorders. In this neuropsychiatry class, neuroimaging and psychiatry class, and one of them's like obsessive compulsive kind of like disorder, and similar to let's say autism. There's like a range of people who um can still have like a life and family, but there's like one particular thing that is you can almost literally diagnose it, say, with obsessive compulsive disorder, and then you have the other end of the spectrum where they can't really function in society at all. Um, yeah, that's a
Let me tell you something else. This is quite fascinating. A lot of people who inherit a lot of money,
uh-huh.
if they're on the spectrum or if they have issues, they end up falling into this trap
Mm,
where they end up going to high end auctions and they just
mm-hmm,
end up buying a crap ton of this stuff.
mm-hmm,
And it's very interesting because it's painful when they die.
mm-hmm.
Because if the people that like are close to them don't know the value of this stuff, they
Oh,
can potentially dump it on the market for pennies on the dollar. They do get taken advantage of sometimes because a
yeah,
lot of these people that buy these valuable items and they just hoard it because they have the money, they don't
yeah.
necessarily tell other people, hey, if I die, I own this coin collection or this comic book collection or this whatever it is. And it could be worth a lot of money. And if those people don't know it and they just, it happens. It's very scary.
Mm, that's yeah, that's crazy. The next question that's coming to mind, and then after this is more about the grading companies, which after me hearing the BGS news, it'd be kind of relevant. Um, but for this question, do high end sports car prices matter in the market or serve as a catalyst to the amount of future demand? The reason why I asked this question is since prices have significantly gone down. Before the narrative was look at that, high price. His Michael Jordan card, went from 40,000 to 720 or $750,000. The market is strong. And now when things, I don't know, say that same card is $120,000, and a lot of these cards are dipping, people are like, well, these high end prices don't really mean much. It's not like I'm ever gonna buy them. like how much do these high end prices matter?
Well, here's the problem. It depends if you're a buyer or a seller, right?
Yeah,
If you're a seller, you're going, hey, you know what? The market might be a little down right now. But if you
yeah.
look at what this card achieved in the past. Therefore, you're getting it at a discount. I want a little bit more than what the market's telling me it's worth at present time. But if it goes back up, you're going to make a fortune.
Mm-hmm.
So it depends if you're the buyer or the seller. Now, if you're the buyer, obviously, well, gee, I'm not going to pay a premium for what it's selling
Mm-hmm.
for now, given the fact that we see the low prices that it achieved. So it really just depends on the perspective.
Mm,
There's something in the antiques and collectibles trade where every once in a while, someone will consign something to auction and it'll be appraised at, let me just use as an example, ten to $15,000. And the auction
mm-hmm.
will end and the item will sell for $25,000 or $30,000. And I get this asked all the time. Shawn, what happened in this auction? Why did somebody come along and pay $25,000 to $30,000 for this item? It was only appraised at $10,000 to $15,000. All previous comps show that the item should have sold for $10,000 to $15,000. Yet here, this particular piece at a high-profile auction, so we know it's not market manipulation per se. It sold for 25 to 30, and I always answer, the seller got one hell of a deal. I mean, that's the buyer's problem, but really, the seller got one hell of a deal on that, didn't he? How
Yeah,
else do you answer it? And that's the
yeah.
problem. This isn't the stock market, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
if we go to the stock market tomorrow, 9:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, the stock market opens.
Yeah.
If I want to sell or buy AT&T stock, all I got to do is look at what it's going for, put in that order, click a button, and I'm going to get that price on the screen.
Mm-hmm.
Antiques and collectibles don't work that way.
Mm,
You can buy something at X number of dollars. You can see others sold at X number of dollars. You can sell yours and you can get more or less for it at any given time. That's what makes it inherently risky. People don't understand that because when you consign to a high-end auction, even if you get a favorable contract, meaning you have something good the auction company wants and they reach out to you and they say, you know what, we'll give you part of the buyer's premium to be able to put this in our auction.
mm-hmm.
Okay? So you're actually getting paid. You're not paying any seller's fees and you're getting part of the buyer's premium because the auction company really wants this in their auction. It's top tier item.
Mm-hmm.
That can still, there's no guarantee on what that's going to sell for. Number
Mm-hmm.
one. And number two, it's going to take several months, if not a full year out, before that item goes into auction and you get paid on it. People don't realize that. Anything can happen in the lead up to that auction. For instance, let's use this as an example. With rising rates, there's a lot of uncertainty in the overall economic calamity that we find ourselves in right now. The current economic environment is cloudy. It's not
Yeah.
like it was a couple of years back where everything was going up in value every single day. Stocks,
Yeah.
bonds, mutual funds, ETFs, real estate, sports cards, collectibles, everything was going up, right? We find ourselves in a situation where a recession might be on the horizon.
Yeah.
So if you consign a collectible right now to auction, you got to understand if the market drops out in the overall economy and you consign that item, there's a chance, even if the auction company told you we appraised this at X number of dollars to X number of dollars, it could still sell for less than that.
Mm-hmm.
There's too much uncertainty in the market.
Mm-hmm.
That's a risk that most people don't understand when they invest in antiques and collectibles.
Mm-hmm.
And on the flip side, I have people, critics, that come to me and say, well, Shawn, I'm going to solve this problem. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hold on to the item and I'm going to field offers and I'm going to only sell if I get an offer that I like. But
Mm,
what you got to understand right now, rates, even in a money market fund, are approaching 5%.
yeah.
That's an opportunity cost for you holding an item. So if you have an item that's worth 10 grand and you just keep holding it every year, that rates are at 5%, assuming they just stay at 5%, not calculating any type of compound interest, you're losing $500 on average.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think people realize that. That's where when we talk from investor to speculator to collector, investors understand that. One of the reasons that collectible prices pulled back so far, it wasn't only because of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
It was what we saw, what investors saw on the horizon with the overall economy.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't safe to invest in those assets anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why the market tanked. And people come, why the market tank? I don't understand, Shawn. State of the economy. That's one reason. That all comes into play. On my channel, I have the saying, no category, no collecting category exists in a vacuum.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is I have a lot of people from the Pokemon community, great at video game community, the Funko Pop community, even the rare coin community, and they all argue with me. No, my category, my preferred collecting category is immune from basic economics, from basic financial principles, from market dynamics. It doesn't work that way.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't. It's just like the stock market.
Mm-hmm.
No one can predict what the stock, if you can predict what the stock market is going to do, believe me, I want to interview you. I want to talk to you regularly. So you know what I mean? I can get in your
Yeah.
brain and make money off this because no one knows.
Yeah.
That's why I get mad. Like when people come to me and go, Shawn, I'm hoarding gold. I'm hoarding silver. I want to buy only hard assets because I have control of them. You don't have control. You don't
Yeah.
know what the market for those assets is going to do. You're just assuming. Gold over the last 5 to 10 years has been a horrible investment. If you're
Yeah.
holding gold, you
Yeah.
lost a ton of money. And you try to sell that to the gold bugs and they look at you like you're nuts. Or else they look at you and they say, well, gold's undervalued. Well, that may be true. Who are you betting against, though? The federal government? You're betting against big banks? I got news for you. They're going to crush you.
Very well said. Um, so I guess these questions are kind of more on breakers and grading.
Sure.
Um, so there's was a controversy, and I remember I was like on sports card radio, and they were talking about this, and a bunch of other content creators were, I guess, talking about this. So there's controversy that Panini may be sending backyard breaks or other breakers loaded boxes, and are there any stories of companies and other collectibles manipulating whom they send their best products to in order to manipulate the market or get more eyes on certain products?
Of course. There's no regulation in these markets.
Hmm.
Am I going to call out any of these companies that I think engage in this? No.
You don't have to.
There, I'm not going to. But I will tell you that, again, there's no regulation. What happens if they do? Even if they get caught?
Mm-hmm.
Evidence that clear to the point where the collecting community is going to turn on them? I don't know, because again, a lot of these, this is what drives me nuts about the collectibles trade. A lot
Mm-hmm.
of these fanboys have so bought into the matrix, if you know what I'm getting at. This
Yeah.
idea that this is a panacea of wealth. Collectibles always go up in value. I
Mm-hmm.
don't think they want to believe it, even if it is true.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we saw this with graded video games.
Mm-hmm.
Alleged market manipulation. I'm sitting here screaming that people are insane not being able to see this with the alleged manipulation with Wada Games, with video game grading that propped up these prices with certain auction houses. And it still drives me nuts to this day that so many people got burned because they
Mm-hmm.
shouldn't have. They should have been able to pull back and say, wait a minute, literally 2 years ago, this graded video game was selling. It wasn't graded, or maybe it was graded by VGA instead of WADA. It was only worth $6,000. Now,
Yeah.
all of a sudden, you're telling me just because a new grading company came to town, it's now worth $500,000? It, where's the variance?
Yeah.
And then they would attack me and say, Shawn, you don't understand pop culture. Mario is iconic. Yes, Mario is iconic. I don't dispute that. But all things have a set process they have to go through.
Mm-hmm.
And this kind of ties into our talk about mass-produced collectibles. It used to be for something to become collectible, it had to become worthless first.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at an Action Comics 1, Detective Comics 27, your favorite vintage Star Wars figures, all that stuff was literally either thrown out or sold at flea markets for pennies on the dollar.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't until decades later that somebody said, wow, that's the first appearance of Superman that person just threw away many years ago.
Yeah.
Or that was a double telescoping Luke Skywalker action figure from Star Wars that was made in 1978 in a limited print run. Somebody threw that away or sold it for $1 at a yard sale. Nowadays, it's almost like collectors don't have the patience to wait for something to actually become scarce and valuable and iconic on the secondary market. It's almost like FOMO has consumed the whole antiques and collectibles trade. Like if I don't buy it now, I'm going to miss out. That's why I said this. The greatest marketing campaign in the history of antiques and collectibles is Pokemon. Do you know why?
Why?
Pokemon came right out of the gate and said, you got to catch them all. And their fan base literally does that each time they print out a new release. And that's how much money they make. That was the most brilliant ad campaign for a collectible manufacturer to ever come up with. Got to catch them all. And that's why I get, on my channel at least, I get attacked daily by the Pokemon collectors who think it's never going to end. This is always going to go strong. And to be fair, the demographics are there that younger collectors are going to enter that market. But the problem is you don't know what they're going to want to buy or if they're going to even gravitate towards the cards at all. Are they going to go towards the video games? Or are they going to say, you know what? I kind of like the WotC era, but aside from that, I don't want all this mass-produced junk. I don't care about it. So it's possible they're going to skip generations. It's possible they're not going to care about, what is it, the Violet and Scarlet era.
Yeah.
Sun and Moon era. They may say, you know what, I don't gravitate towards that. But the Pokemon company's still making money, aren't they? Because little Timmy, Kimmy, and Poindexter has to catch them all.
Yeah. I had a friend actually. There are a few people actually I worked with. It's surprising how many people who are like in their 20s or even early 30s who are in anime, or who were growing up. Yeah, I did know a few people. It's like just like them and their wife, kind of like got back into Pokemon, and but they weren't really investors. They were just more nostalgic, and they wanted something that they could kind of like afford and kind of play with friends though. So it wasn't like one of those things where it was like, oh, I need to invest in Pokemon. Um, the so I guess there's a couple of things with the grading questions. All right. I think I kind of understand, but like there's so many theories of I hear people say. So why is there a massive gap in the demand for graded companies as far as PSA, BGS, SGC, and CSG? I guess for TCG and sports cards. So for example, PSA 10 of the same card, literally the same card, for PSA 10 could sell for like 2x of a CSG 10 and SGC 10, um, and and also a BGS 9.5. And there are certain cards where BGS 9.5 Mint Plus sells for 1K, but a PSA 10 sells for like 4K. And the BGS has a lower pop count.
Correct. Because people are gravitating towards the more established collecting companies that other collectors are telling them to go towards. It's just like in rare coins. In rare coins, I don't know why PCGS is the standard. NGC does an excellent job. But if you have a PCGS coin, it's going to sell on average 20% higher than that NGC coin. Same grade, same condition, everything. Mint mark and all, exactly the same. It makes no sense to me. Now, what PSA did correct was they use a simpler grading scale. Like a lot of these companies like BGS, CGC with collectible card games, they have the subgrades. So now you kind of have to play a game. Like when I used to collect Magic the Gathering cards that were graded by BGS, I would buy them in 9.5 with all 9.5 subgrades. That was what I went after. Well, if I was going after a PSA graded card, I would just get a PSA 10. It just seemed more simpler. So over time, I actually preferred to collect Magic the Gathering Pokemon cards that were graded by PSA because I could just get the PSA 10 and be done with it. Then I don't have to worry. Well, now BGS graded a 9.5 with two 9.5 subgrades and a 10 or a 9 point, you know what I mean? It just got too complex. I mean, I salute them for breaking out the subgrades, but it's creating more complexities in the market than what it's supposed to solve, in my opinion.
Okay.
It shouldn't be that complex. I mean, you can compare a sports card or a trading card to that of a comic book.
Mm-hmm.
And I could never see a grading company like CGC that also grades comic books along with trading cards breaking out subgrades for a comic book where they have centering, corners,
Mm-hmm.
because it would apply almost similar,
Yeah.
but it's just ridiculous to me.
Mm-hmm.
So I get it that some collectors feel, well, Shawn, I'm getting more information on the card. In all actuality, you're not, because PSA doesn't award a PSA 10 to just everything that walks through the door.
Yeah.
They're taking all that into account and they're giving their best judgment.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is something that a lot of people don't understand. Grading is more of an art than that of a science.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of people that love to tell me, well, Shawn, I'm waiting for the day that computers can grade all these collectibles, where
Mm-hmm.
we have AI doing it. And I can tell you, if you go all the way back and you study the history of coin grading, that was
Mm-hmm.
the first third-party graded collectible that could ever be encapsulated and graded. They tried computerized grading and it failed miserably.
Mm-hmm.
So anytime we talk about grading, third-party grading in the antiques and collectibles trade, it's always going to be more subjective than that of a science.
Okay.
Because you also have people that crack out cards that go, well, gee, this came back a BGS 8 or an 8.5 or a PSA 8. I think it should have been higher.
Uh-huh.
And to be fair, grading companies love that because they just
Uh-huh.
get more money because the person's sending the
Uh,
card back in for grading. In some cases, yes, they will get either a lower grade or a higher grade.
that's interesting because there are quite a few flippers who kind of do this thing where they notice this, and some of them have kind of gotten good
Yes.
understanding specific cards. It's like, oh, they're great at lore here,
Mhm.
and then they look at it and then they crack it and maybe send it to the same grading company or send it to a completely different grading company,
Yeah.
and end up making a good profit of certain things. Um, yeah, I guess yeah, I guess this wasn't necessarily planned, but I believe BGS like retracted it, but they were going to change the grading scale because I just hear BGS seems to have gone down in popularity since the pandemic
Correct.
because it just seems like they haven't really done much during the pandemic. They're just like, oh, all this money's coming in, great. But they didn't really do much. But it seems like it's under new management now. So maybe you have old school versus new school. And new school is like, well, we need to change. And it's weird because it's like, oh, well, now we should be more like PSA. But I don't know if they did, let's say, retract what they were saying, even if they said they went through it, I don't know like how that affects, BGS 9.5 values, BGS 10 values. I don't know what's your take on this.
The secondary market has to sort that out.
Mm,
There's no fast rule I can give you that this is going to apply if this happens, or if the grading company does this, this is going to occur. It just takes time for the secondary market to pretty much sort it out. And I'm going to be honest, that's the risk, right? Grading
mm-hmm,
scales can change over time. Grading standards can change over time.
mm,
Like right now in coin grading is based on the Sheldon coin grading model, where
mm,
coins can get graded anywhere from a 1 all the way up to a 70.
okay.
Well, trying to teach that to a collector that grew up collecting comic books or toys
Mm-hmm,
or sports cards that pretty much use a variant of a 1 to 10 grading scale,
mm-hmm,
it can be difficult to teach that. So for the
mm-hmm.
longest time, a lot of these companies are trying to get us coin collectors to adopt this 1 to 10 grading scale as opposed to 1 to
Oh,
70.
okay.
And a lot of us are against it because we have decades of experience in coin
Mm-hmm,
collecting. And it's like, hey, if you want to learn rare coins, you're going to have to learn this funky grading scale that's been
mm-hmm,
around since the 1950s, literally.
mm-hmm,
And a lot of these companies, they're slick. They say, well, wait a minute. If we introduce a 1 to 10 grading scale in this market, little Timmy, Kimmy, or Poindexter Jr., who collects comic books, video games, and toys that uses a 1 to 10 grading scale, they already are going to know the grading scale or they're going to understand it better. But
okay.
somebody like me who's sitting on a $100,000 coin collection, guess what? If you do that, Now I have to resend you. Interesting how this works for the grading company. I have to resend my collection of coins into you to be graded again under the new scale.
Mm-hmm.
Why the hell would I risk that?
Yeah.
And that's what a lot of high profile dealers, auction houses are even saying. You know, they have clients, some of these dealers, some of these high profile coin dealers, they have 5 million, $10 million worth of inventory,
Mm-hmm.
graded coins. They're not just going to go, gee, that's a great idea. Let's all adopt a 1 to 10 scale. Here, let me send it out via FedEx. Let me know how much I'm going to have to pay when you grade this shit. They're not going to go for that. Come on. And I'm breaking it down. I know it sounds stupid the way that I'm breaking
Yeah.
it down, but that's really what's going on in their heads. It's like, this is ridiculous. Why do I have to cater to these new speculators that just don't want to learn anything? You know, they know the price of everything, but the value of nothing, to quote Warren Buffett. That's
Mm-hmm.
really what's happening with these people that are coming into the market like this.
Mm.
Certain collecting markets should not be speculator friendly. And
Okay.
this is a controversial concept, but I've argued against speculation for many years because
Mm-hmm.
all is what it does is it brings in people who just see dollar signs.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very easy in our capitalistic society to just see dollar signs.
Mm-hmm.
But if you want to succeed in these markets, you have to know what goes into them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I could tell you right now, hey, real estate's a great investment.
Mm-hmm.
Go and get yourself 4 or 5 rental properties, and you'll have X number of dollars per month coming in if you can rent
Mm-hmm.
those properties out. Well, if you don't know the ins and outs of real estate, or maybe you don't even have the temperament to want to deal with tenants and deal with that at an active level every day of your life, it's probably not for you. It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
matter that some people are successful at real estate. You
Mm-hmm.
have to know what goes into something to make it work so you can get money out of it. It's the same thing with the antiques and collectibles trade. And sadly, we have too many people coming in with a speculator mindset that just go, well, I love Pokemon. I'm going to pay a premium for it. And when I go to sell it, because other people love Pokemon, they're going to pay me
Mm-hmm.
more for it. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't work that way. At some point, that's a Ponzi scheme.
Mm-hmm.
That's why you have all these people right now that are hoarding cardboard. That's really all they're doing. They're buying the latest Magic set, sports cards, Pokemon, Flesh and Blood. They're just throwing it in a closet and they're going, what's going to go up in value? Well, I don't think you realize when you go to sell that, whether it's a year from now, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now, there's going to be other people that had that same mindset.
Yeah.
So a lot of it's going to be on the market. We actually refer to that in the antiques and collectibles trade as the depth of the market.
Mm.
Like if you go into the market and you look, well, how many boxes of Pokemon generations can I find? You're going to find a lot of them.
Yeah.
Did the price go up? Yeah, there's demand for that particular product,
Yeah.
but there's a lot out there. It's not on par with buying a factory seal booster box of base,
Yeah.
shadowless, or first edition.
Mm-hmm.
And people don't seem to have that mentality where they think if everybody's hoarding this stuff, there's going to be a lot more available in the coming years. And this
Mm.
goes back to what we were talking about before when we brought up about how come people that put out like a subscription investor news or price guides or
Yeah.
telling you what to buy, that's why it's corrupt. Because if everybody bought it, all those products would be readily available on the market
Yeah.
at some point because they're sitting in people's collections.
Yeah. So the other thing is the vault services.
Oh, I hate them.
Yeah, so everybody seems to have a vault service now. And my assumption is they're trying to get these vault services so you buy cards and basically so they can charge you for holding them and force you to sell and do as many transactions as possible so they can build up their cash flow in a sense or gain a lot of money from you and gain
Oh,
as many cards as possible.
of course. There's a business term known as stickiness.
Mm,
And basically what stickiness is if you bank at a bank,
mm-hmm,
they'll give you a free checking account,
mm-hmm,
provided that you have direct deposit on a regular basis. Maybe you
mm-hmm,
have to make a couple of transactions a month.
mm-hmm,
The reason why they do that is because they know if they get you as a customer, you're probably going to also have a Netflix subscription coming out of your account.
mm-hmm.
You're gonna potentially have maybe Amazon Prime coming out of your account or Hulu or whatever. Well, that creates stickiness. So now if another bank comes along and they says, "Hey, we'll give you X number of dollars to come over here and join our bank. You can just transfer everything over here." Well, now, well, gee, I got to cancel the checking account. I got to cancel my Netflix and or transfer it over here. I have to transfer my Hulu, my Amazon
Hmm.
Prime to you, and it just becomes a hassle. That's consumer stickiness.
Hmm.
It's the same thing that eBay and all these other companies are doing. Hey, you know what? You could buy this sports card. We're not going to charge you sales tax. You just put it on our vault. And little Timmy, when you want to go to sell the sports card, you come to us, you let us know, and we'll have it readily available on auction for you.
Hmm.
Of course, it creates stickiness. They now get money from you buying that particular item, the transaction fees. And now when you go to sell it, they get it again.
Hmm.
And now the person who's going to buy it from you, they're going to go, "Do you want to vault this card?"
Hmm.
For that reason. So they could potentially sell that same card over and over and over and over again, almost indefinitely, and they make all that money.
Yeah.
Auction companies try to do this all the time. You know, I'm a member, or I should say, I really like heritage auctions,
Hmm.
and I know that's a controversial statement because some people hate heritage auctions. I get it. I've heard both ends. Well, I'm a legacy member with them.
Yeah.
So when I buy something, they ship the item to me before I even pay.
Hmm.
If I go to sell, all I got to do is call my rep and I say, "Hey, I'm thinking of selling this collection." And they'll
Hmm.
give me very competitive rates in the open market to consign that with them. So it creates stickiness.
Yeah.
So a lot of companies in the antiques and collectibles trade are kind of looking at this from a different perspective where we know how these markets work. We know how the average speculator, collector, and investor operates. How can we profit from this? And I
Exactly.
guarantee you, behind the scenes, they're bringing in economists, they're bringing in even psychiatrists, and
Hmm.
they're analyzing these markets from both a psychology level and
Hmm.
also an economic level. And they're saying, how can we capture all these dollars? And somebody's saying, well, hey, the way that we can make this work the best is if these people keep buying and selling this stuff into the market. How do we get them to do that? Well, the easiest way, you can vault this card with us because here's the thing that nobody realizes. That particular individual that bought that card never held that card.
Hmm.
They never touched it. It never got
Hmm.
sent to them. It's in a vault. So
Yeah.
it's this abstract thing that's not paying them a dividend. That's just sitting over here.
Mm.
So at any given time, they can go, why do I have this thing? It's not doing me any good. I can't touch it. I can't hold it. I'll just click the button and have eBay sell it for me. And now they
Mm.
just flipped it again, and eBay makes a lot of money on that. Comes down to psychology.
That's one of those things that doesn't matter, right? They make money whether you lose or gain money.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
What's your take on redemption cards? That's something that people in the sports car hobby that they're obsessed with. A lot of people like. Is it even necessary to have redemption cards or yeah?
In
I
my
don't know.
opinion, no. I don't like any of that stuff. It's a gimmick. Again, it's
Mm-hmm.
another form of a gimmick. That's all it is. Since the beginning of time, these companies have been looking for a way to pretty much market these particular products to a certain group of people. And again, I hate to say this, there is an overlap between the speculators and gamblers. Literally,
Mm-hmm.
that's all is what it is it's legalized gambling.
Mm.
All this is.
There are a few people who there's actually quite a few people because this is going to go into my next question about breakers and what do you think about breaking in sense. And I know I think he's a sports card investor. I mean, I guess he's kind of talking with Fanatics. I guess he's the biggest person in the sports card market as of now. Um, and he was saying him talking with Fanatics, their biggest focus of growing the hobby is actually going for through breaking and going after the type of people who like to break.
Oh,
And I guess also with sports betting is really big now too. So I guess like those kind of people. So I don't know what's your take on breaking because I just think it's complete gambling.
oh, it is.
Um, yeah.
Oh, it is. It's basically been a boom though for the collectibles trade, especially during the pandemic, because people
Mm-hmm.
were stuck indoors and you could watch people open up boxes and then they could
Mm-hmm.
buy into to those breaks and get whatever cards were opened. But it's nothing more than legalized gambling. It's just it's an endorphin rush. That's all it is. I've
Mm-hmm.
always been against that. I think it's ridiculous. I honestly think that they should regulate it. But again, I know I'm in the minority on that because if I ever speak that, people attack me and say, "Oh, you're one of those guys that's for regulation." Okay, you know, like I get attacked consistently, and you know what I mean. Like there's people that come on my
Yeah.
channel and they're like, "Oh my gosh, they need to abolish the Fed." Why? Because you don't. Where does this come from? Conspiracy theory 101. I don't get it.
Do you think it's like maybe have something to do with like I don't know 2008 and bailing out the banks, and now people just don't trust the government because they're like, oh well, they're for the wealthiest people, and just and maybe that's why this whole belief in crypto now, and just I mean I don't know, it's belief in institutions is an all time high now. So I don't know, maybe
Oh, I
that's
agree. That's
surprising a lot
part
of
of it.
stuff.
That's part of it. But I also think too, and I'm going to get a little bit political here, so please bear with
That's
me.
fine.
Hope you don't mind.
Fine.
In the 1980s, when Ronald Reagan came in office, he
Mm-hmm.
put a lot of doubt in people's minds that the government was actually competent. As a matter of
Mm,
fact, I think one of his most famous sayings is the worst words you can ever hear is the government's coming to save you, or I'm with the government, I'm coming to help you.
mm-hmm.
So ever since the 1980s, we've been going into a direction where people, for whatever reason, doubt or don't trust the government.
Mm,
And we now got to the point where, again, this is going to be controversial. I'm going to say this, and
mm-hmm.
these are my words. Feel free
Mm-hmm.
to attack me on this, but this is just my perception. We have a whole political party that has pretty much been putting out there the government is dysfunctional.
Mm-hmm.
We can't govern, or they can't govern. Then when
Mm-hmm.
they get political power, they're like, well, what do you want us to do to solve the problem? We told you the government was dysfunctional.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
It-
yeah.
Getting to this point where people sit home and they're very siloed.
Mm-hmm.
So they listen to like Tucker Carlson, they listen to
Mm-hmm.
Fox News, or even on the left, they listen to MSNBC, they listen to the
Mm-hmm.
Young Turks, they listen to all these other people. And it just puts doubt in people's minds. To be
Mm,
fair, are there problems with the government? Is there
mhm.
corruption in the system? The answer is yes.
Yeah.
Is the answer, though, complete libertarianism or complete free market systems with no regulation where everybody's just doing their own thing where they can do whatever they want? No. I think that people have a fear of overregulation because it's been sold to them all wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Regulation is a good thing. It's the reason that most of us are still sitting here and breathing and still relatively healthy.
Yeah.
We didn't have regulation in a capitalistic environment, greed would run amok. And unfortunately, greed, we know, is almost like a disease that pretty much people put their own interests ahead of the human race.
Yeah.
That's why we have problems where occasionally you hear contamination in the drinking water causes
Mm-hmm.
cancer, or issues in the air, toxic chemicals being released in the air. There's no regulation.
Mm-hmm.
Certain political parties have sold this as, well, we need to roll back those job killing regulations.
Mm-hmm.
And you got to step back and you got to ask, what jobs are you killing here? It makes no sense.
Mm-hmm.
And you analyze it from that standpoint. Do you really want a job that's going to put your health at risk? Is it really worth it? I mean, if I pay you 200 grand a year and you're going to be dead in 10 years from cancer, is it really? I mean, I know it sounds stupid,
Yeah.
but is that really worth the risk, that $2 million you're going to earn in that 10 years if you're going to die from cancer on the other end?
Yeah. That's a good point.
It,
That's a
it
good
makes no
point.
sense to me. So that's where I think a lot of this is stemming from, because there's such a political divide and it's become cultural, and it's gotten to the point of pure stupidity
Mm-hmm.
where nobody takes a step back and goes, well, wait a minute. Why do we have this regulation?
Mm-hmm.
Nobody ever sat around and said, you know what? Let's come up with ways to regulate people just for the hell of it.
Mm-hmm.
Even the most ridiculous regulations that are on the books, and there are some, I can name some in certain states,
Mm-hmm.
there was a reason why that law was enacted.
Mm-hmm.
And if the reason doesn't exist, they can bring it to a forum and have it repealed or
Yeah.
replaced. But there has to be a reason why you're replacing it as well.
Yeah.
And that's what's interesting to me about how we got to this point. So for whatever reason, regulation is seen as a negative thing. I don't consider it negative. I consider it necessary. Even in the antiques and collectibles trade, I talk about this on my channel. Most markets are free of regulation. Well, if you
Hmm.
get into like the ivory trade, if you start dealing in like gray market antiques and collectibles as well, stuff that may have been pillaged from museum during a
Hmm.
war,
Hmm.
those markets are regulated. You
Hmm.
can get into a lot of trouble. The same thing's true if you get into the market for antiquities, items that are thousands of years old. If
Hmm.
it turns out that another country has a claim on that particular item, it doesn't matter that you paid millions of dollars for it in an auction house.
Hmm.
They can literally just take that item from you.
Oh, wow.
They don't have to reimburse you. That's why those markets get inherently risky.
Mm.
The same thing that's true when we start talking about certain uncomfortable things throughout American history or even
Mhm.
world history, like Nazis,
Mhm.
slave trade. When we start talking
Mhm.
about that, there's people that honestly try to fight to make those things legal, meaning that
Mhm.
auction houses should be able to deal in them, people should be able to buy them. But on the other end of the spectrum, you also have to understand that you may be buying an item that potentially other people like myself view as offensive. So if
Mhm.
it comes up to the market, I don't care how much investment potential is in it. I'm not going to
Yeah.
touch it.
Yeah.
So you have to be very careful where you draw the line.
Mm.
I tend to think, honestly, auction houses in a lot of these markets would do better if they were more regulated.
Mm.
You wouldn't have a lot of the market manipulation on the underside of the trade that nobody wants to talk about going on because auction companies would be scared. They wouldn't witty nitty just put out a press release saying this is the most scarce collectible, this is iconic, historic,
Mhm.
oh my gosh, it's the first version of Castlevania ever to come to the market, and it's going to sell for 1.8 million dollars, almost like somebody sitting there behind the scenes already starting to bid on it that works for the auction company.
Uh-huh.
Few people know this. The reason why a lot of these auction companies have so much power
Mhm.
is because when the rules were written, a lot of auctioneers were also politicians back in the day.
Oh.
Nobody ever looks at that. There's a reason why auction companies wield so much power in the trade. A lot of these individuals that made money back in the day also had an auctioneering license or ability
Mhm.
or owned an auction house. It's just like everybody hears the story of America, the founding story of America, and everybody wants to believe, oh, we all came together, we the people, we
Mhm.
overthrew the British so that we could have our own country and we could all go forth together and build this excellent nation. That's 100% false.
Mhm.
John Hancock, who was one of the guys that really wanted, one of the founding fathers that really wanted to overthrow the British, he had a
Mhm.
very successful tea business. He was
Mhm.
very wealthy. And the British started taxing tea.
Mhm.
It affected him directly.
Mhm.
So he had a vested interest to overthrow the British. There
Mhm.
was no we the people. We
Mhm.
didn't do this to create a new nation to the point where we thought this is going to be great. It was more done on a whim to protect the self interests of most of the founding fathers, even Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin was a womanizer, an alcoholic, and he also
Mhm.
ran some businesses. He was
Mhm.
not stupid by any means. He was
Mhm.
also not a good person per se.
Mhm.
He wanted to overthrow the British for personal reasons.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean what they did didn't have risks. Obviously, if
Yeah.
they would have lost, they would have all been killed. They would have been executed and hung. Let's be
True.
realistic. But we keep creating this narrative that somehow these men did something great for our benefit. Did they
Mhm.
really? And I ask that question, and again, it's controversial. It's like, what
Mhm.
kind of American are you? I take a lot of pride in America, but I also
Mhm.
recognize America has problems that we need to fix.
Mhm.
So does Great Britain. So if we would have stayed under Great Britain rule, there would have been issues there as well. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to say one is better or worse than the other. I'm just saying you got to look deeper rather than what your history class taught you that these were great men that just took on the British. They thought they were being treated unfairly and they did it to help everybody out. We the people.
Mhm.
People doesn't exist. If I would literally look at America today, I would call it we the corporations. Not we the people. And I think anybody who watches that segment and
Mhm.
literally listens to what I'm saying, whether you're on the left, the right, you're somewhere in between, I think you would agree with that corporations have
Yeah.
way too much power.
Yeah.
And this
Yeah.
extends to the antiques and collectibles trade. I've said this before. If you want to invest in antiques and collectibles and you want to be successful, try to form an auction company that becomes very
Mhm.
well known, or form a grading company. Easiest way to make money in these markets. It's like printing
Mm.
currency.
That is that was yeah, that's very useful information.
If you put that video out, I'm sure you're going to get a lot of hate comments on that because, oh my God, who is this guy coming on here saying this? He's un-American. I'm not un-American. I'm very patriotic, but I got to state the truth. It's
Yeah.
gotten to this point where everything's a conspiracy or everything. I'm against any type of government regulation. Well, I got news for you. That government regulation has served you pretty well behind the
Yeah.
scenes that you may not be aware of for most of your life.
Yeah. It's funny you say this because I'm actually really into history and I actually read quite a few books on history. Some of the things you talk about, finding power, stuff like that. I read a book called American Nations, and it kind of talks about just the history of America. You know, people think everybody got along and stuff like that, but that really wasn't the case. And talk about alternative motives, and just so much that was going on in different factions and how different parts of the country there's different cultures and how they conflict with each other, things such as that. There are a few other books like I don't know the fourth turning and talk about there's certain things about patterns in history and also patterns in American history and
Yeah.
just Western history of how you kind of go through these cycles. And the entry you said started in 1980s. This cycle, and there's other books that don't really talk about, let's say, the fourth turning, but other things as far as patterns. And one particular person is Paul Kennedy that wrote this book called The Rise and Fall of Great Powers. And investor Ray Dalio came out with a book recently, and Ray Dalio has read his book, and a lot of this stuff is kind of based off of this as well. But the rise and fall of great powers basically look at the rise and fall of superpowers since the 1500s, and then by the time you get to America, you're like, we've seen this. I've heard this before, and there's a lot of things that kind of repeat themselves. But one of the things that kind of coincide, like in the 80s, it's like becomes this like high individualistic ideal, and the things people become more, I don't know, say narcissistic, but more in celebrity culture, more in individualism, individual freedoms, and eventually, once that goes too long, you go into the fourth turning, which is considered like winter, where you have all these conflict, eroding of institutions, and then things eventually there's this crazy conflict. I guess the last time, Great Depression, World War II. Hopefully, it doesn't get that bad. But before, it's been around American Revolution or Civil War time period, where you have this things kind of come to a head, and there's this um, a lot of times it's a war, but maybe not necessarily some kind of conflict or something, and it gets resolved and it kind of resets itself. And at least society is able to move forward in a better direction than the direction it was continuing to go because it will like basically destroy itself in a sense. So hopefully that becomes kind of the thing.
Did you read Ray Dalio's The Changing World Order?
Yes, I read it.
Excellent book. Yes, very much. I agree.
The next question I had was before you were talking about vintage, modern, and ultra modern. Where do you draw the line? Because certain people draw the line differently for vintage,
Sure.
modern, and ultra modern cards. So what are those date ranges, and like how do people even come up with that?
Okay, to be fair, there's a lot of different definitions in the trade. I want to be very clear here. By no means, if you don't agree with me, I understand. This is my assessment. I
Mhm.
consider everything pre 1980 to be
Okay.
vintage. Okay. 1980 to 2000 is considered modern.
Okay.
After 2000 is considered ultra modern to me.
Okay.
So I break it up that way. And a lot of people agree with that. And other people say, no, Shawn, you're way off the mark there. So when I tell people you should be investing in vintage, I'm talking pre 1980,
Okay.
preferably 1960s and earlier, because even the 1970s and 80s, people started hoarding this stuff. Some of it is out there. Let's be realistic.
Mm-hmm.
But I give people those 2 decades because if I would say 1960s and earlier, everyone would be like, that's completely insane, Shawn. They would just completely not listen. So that's where I will concede 1980 and earlier for vintage. People also don't like the fact that I define everything from 1980 to 2000 as modern.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's a lot of people think that there should be another category in there.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like comic books. When you look at the definitions of Silver Age, Golden Age, Bronze Age, Copper Age, Modern Era, they're all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
I tend to keep it very simple. I basically tell people if the book was published, if the comic book was published literally before 1955, it's Golden Age in most cases.
Mm-hmm.
From 1955 all the way up to 1969, you're in the Silver Age, if
Mm-hmm.
that means anything to you. From 1970 to 1979 is where I draw the line at Bronze Age.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people have a problem with that because they want to go all the way up to 1984 and put that in the Bronze Age.
Okay.
Because it almost becomes like how do I want to say this? A marketing term.
Mm-hmm.
They can go, well, this comic, the Wolverine Limited Series 1 that came out in 1982, I think it is, that's Bronze Age. And
Mm-hmm.
in my definition, no, that's
Mm-hmm.
Copper Age. So I don't think you're going to ever get anybody to fully agree on these terms at this particular point. And I think really when we look back, it's always changing, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
perspective is 20/20 hindsight.
Mm-hmm.
So when we look back, it's almost like, well, gee, should that really be there or would this make more sense?
Mm-hmm.
That's especially true for sports cards.
Yeah.
Because really nobody tried to define vintage before. Because if you were in the market for sports cards in the 1990s and you said vintage, everybody automatically assumed, well, 1950s and earlier is vintage
Yeah.
because the 1990s from the 1950s was only like 40 years.
Yeah.
So that was pretty much considered modern. Like that's where my mentors would teach me. Anything after the 1960s and sports cards is modern.
Mm-hmm.
I don't necessarily agree with that statement today,
Mm-hmm.
but it makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why really we can even take this further. If you want to invest in Honus Wagner and you have the money, that's actually antique.
Yeah.
That qualifies as an antique. And an antique item is just defined as an item that is 100 years of age or older.
Okay.
That would qualify as antique. So you could really say antique, vintage, modern, ultra modern.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, I think they need to eventually, as time goes on, come up with another defining age in between vintage and modern,
Mm-hmm.
because there should be a transition there.
Mm.
Most markets have a transition point,
Okay.
whatever it is. When we go from antique to vintage to modern, it's not clear cut and dry. Usually there is a transition point.
Okay. Because I would think it may differ between different sports. Because if you look at, let's say, pop counts for certain things, um, for basketball, for example, pre 1986, most of the stuff, at least in the higher grades, it's very hard to find stuff that way. But for football and baseball, there are sets where
Yeah.
getting a PSA 9 for something is like 3,000 of them, and it's
Mhm.
like, or just 5,000 or some crazy. It's just like, why are there so many of these? Um, yeah, I guess the real question is, so can modern and ultra modern even be considered investment? Because even from your standpoint, like a lot of a lot of people will say LeBron James is the safest investment you can put your money in. And you consider, if you consider ultra modern, like I don't know, like what even ultra modern and modern be considered an actual investment.
It's more speculative.
Okay.
Let me word it that way. I
Mm.
wouldn't see it personally, in my opinion, no. Because maybe 10 to 20 years from now, yes.
Okay.
We can literally look back and we can go, wow, That would have been a great investment if I would have bought in.
Mm-hmm.
But right now, talking from that standpoint, it's too risky. Therefore, it's speculative.
Mm-hmm.
The market's too volatile at this point to be able to look at that and say, that's going to be the blue chip card. And I know
Mm-hmm.
there's people watching this right now, if they're still watching it after I went through my political tirade,
Mm-hmm.
um, that are going to say, well, wait a minute, Shawn, that's completely untrue. I know that that card is going to have value 10, 20, 30 years out,
Mm-hmm.
but not compared to like looking at another card like a Michael Jordan, or
Mm-hmm.
even like looking at baseball cards, comparing it to baseball cards. It's not going to be like a Mickey Mantle or a Willie Mays or a Hank Aaron. We don't know that yet.
Mm-hmm.
That's the difference.
Okay.
In other words, it's too new.
Okay.
Now, that's my problem with people that try to invest in a lot of these newer collectibles, modern era.
Mm-hmm.
It's too new to know what's going to happen on the secondary market because tastes can change. There's only one truth to the entire antiques and collectibles trade, and that
Mm-hmm.
is change is the name of the game.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about change.
Mm-hmm.
If we would go back, if I would get an DeLorean time machine and we would go back to the 1980s, 70s, 60s, 50s, 40s, even the 30s, and you would see what people would collect, you'd be like, wow, that never took off. Why would anybody build a collection of that? Why is that
Mm-hmm.
person over there collecting depression glass? I don't get it.
Yeah.
Why is that person over there? Wow, in the 1950s now. Why are they really gung ho about Schwinn bicycles? Why are they hoarding Lionel trains? No young person in 1990s or the 2000s or 2023 is going to want a Lionel toy train.
Yeah.
And these are all popular collecting products of a bygone era. Perspective is everything. That's why I tell people, did you ever watch, I don't know, it's on TV every time around Christmas, A Christmas Story?
Yeah, I've seen it. Yeah.
I asked this question a lot in some of my earlier videos that I shot for YouTube. I would ask, how many of you are drinking Ovaltine? How many of you want a Daisy BB gun? A Daisy
Mm-hmm.
Red Ryder BB gun? How many of you are watching War of the Worlds or know what War of the Worlds is or know who Annie Oakley is? These are all references that are mentioned in A Christmas Story. It's the time of the era that he grew up in.
Yeah.
And Daisy BB guns were once collected. They were once prized collectibles. They're not anymore.
Oh.
You don't
Wow.
realize that. Yeah, that's a real company. So was Ovaltine. Annie Oakley was a real person. I don't know if you remember in the movie, he sends in proof of purchases from Ovaltine and he gets an Annie Oakley Dakota ring.
Okay. Yeah.
It's a real thing. People don't
Oh.
realize that. Yeah, that's all realistic. And people watch it and it just goes over their head. And then they
Mm-hmm.
want to argue with me. Well, Shawn, I'm collecting this and it's going to be important 40 years down the line. Well, wait a minute. You just watched a movie where they told you things and items that were popular, what, 60, 70, 80 years ago?
Mm-hmm.
And it completely went over your head that things change. That's what I
Mm-hmm.
have to tell people. That's why that's a great example of a movie that everybody should watch before they get in the antiques and collectibles trade for that reason.
Mm-hmm.
Because it really level sets. This is what's popular right now. It doesn't mean this is what's always going to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I even apply that to Pokemon, Magic, everything. Comic books. Eventually, collectors and enthusiasts are going to fall out of love with comic books. It's going to happen. The reason why that market is propped up so high right now is because of the Marvel Cinematic Universe and how they handle that.
Oh yeah.
Eventually, people are going to get sick of all these. They're already starting to.
Mm-hmm.
It's insane the amount of superhero movies that keep coming out. I mean, the one thing that I loved about the pandemic, and I'm a comic book enthusiast, believe me, I love comic
Mm-hmm.
books. So this is going to hurt when I say this, but the one thing that I loved about the pandemic is they freaking put on hold all those stupid movies.
Mm-hmm.
It got to the point, oh God, now we have Black Widow. Now we have to sit through Morbius. Oh God, now we have the Ant-Man and Wasp and another movie in that series. It's like, come on, man.
And
I
that's
don't
just really
care anymore.
yeah. There's really and then mostly like Marvel's really coming out with more of the movies. DC wasn't really thriving as much because I'm actually more of a DC fan and
Batman.
I'm more of like a Batman fan of anything.
Yes.
Um, but like, but also, yeah, as I think as a millennial, some of the other millennials I've talked to, there are few superhero movies that we were kind of, at least some people I talked to were kind of interested in, like Batman Beyond, because there was a somewhat of a popular cartoon that was out when a lot of people I knew were kids. Static Shock was interesting, because I thought the cartoon was good, and then the Teen Titans, because the cartoon or whatever. Um, but yeah, it's yeah, when I think about comic books, I think that's more of like a baby boomer Gen X kind of a thing. And then after that, and then maybe like much older millennials in a sense. Even if I talk to Gen Z, I don't think comic books. Yeah, I honestly I know more people who are into like anime comics and manga than like the traditional comic books.
Correct. I don't doubt that. It's different
So,
generations. That's really what's happening. In order for a collecting category to survive, you have to have multi-generational collectors.
mm-hmm,
And that's why I always laugh because I deal with a lot of vintage toy collectors, right? Obviously.
mm-hmm,
So I have people that collect like Transformers, G.I.
mm-hmm,
Joe, Masters of the Universe,
mm-hmm,
and you could tell they have so much passion in their eyes when they come to me with
mm-hmm,
this stuff and they tell me what I think about it. And unfortunately, when you look at how long these particular toy lines existed on the overall primary market when they were released back in the 80s,
mm-hmm.
virtually none of them have multi-generational appeal. Like Masters of
Yeah.
the Universe, especially. And people don't realize this. Netflix literally just premiered a miniseries devoted to
Mm-hmm,
Masters of the Universe, and it did fairly poorly.
mm-hmm,
It did not capture a new generation of fans.
mm-hmm,
G.I. Joe, the G.I. Joe that I remember was coming home from school, watching the
mm-hmm,
television, the animated series after school with Cobra, and
mm-hmm,
they would fight, and it was an incredible toy line.
mm-hmm,
Today, Hasbro really hasn't done anything superior with it.
mm-hmm.
Now, you can argue Transformers, they had a couple of, I think, the Michael Bay films
Yeah, I
that,
remember
that
those.
caught on a little bit.
Yeah,
But overall, you really it's a toy line that's starting to be forgotten.
yeah,
Not on par with Star Wars. I tell that to people.
that's true. Yeah, yeah, because some of the stuff I've seen, even cartoons, I did see like Transformers cartoon. Maybe I had a Transformer. I think I had a GI Joe figure, but I was exposed to so much other stuff, and then the anime was the thing that I gravitated to, and it was like Dragon Ball Z was like the first thing that I got obsessed with, and I think maybe Pokemon and Digimon and a bunch of stuff like that, and then it kind of went on from there. So yeah, I'm familiar, but it never caught on for me. I had Hot Wheels too, but that's not something I wanted to be like, oh, I want to collect Hot Wheels.
Hot Wheels is a dying category, believe it or not. And you try to tell that to a lot of older people and they get defensive, even people my age.
Mm,
A lot of younger collectors are not being drawn to Hot Wheels.
okay. I remember like watching some of your videos, and one of the things you said was like, uh, you, I think you were talking about video games, some, but you said you don't like sports memorabilia, but you don't have a problem with sports cards. Why is that the case?
Because sports memorabilia, the market is a little bit more corrupt.
Oh, okay.
There's a lot of fraudulent signatures out there. There's a lot of, how do I word this, hanky panky in that market where there's a lot of market manipulation. There's a lot of fakes on the market.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of items being misrepresented that are being
Mm,
sold. So you have to be very careful if you're getting involved in that market. It's almost on par. It's unfortunately the market is established,
mm-hmm.
but it almost acts like a sophisticated market where there's a lot of research required if you're going to buy into it, if you get the analogy.
Okay.
So there really is, even with third party grading in that market and authentication, it's not perfect. There's a lot of
Okay.
fakes and fraudulent signatures out there, a lot of pieces that are not what they claim to be. And I personally know a lot of people that got involved in that market who were able to build multi-million-dollar collections, and when they took it to auction, some of their prized pieces turned out to be fake or inauthentic. Yeah, and they lost a lot of money. So that's why I tell people to use a lot of caution in that market, because it's too easy for con people to come into that market, and just seeing easy dollar signs, they can pretty much come into that market and make a fortune and sell fake merchandise. You have to
Wow.
really be cautious. That's why I tell people, if you're going to buy any of that stuff, go through a vetted auction house, bring in an expert, just make sure that it's legit, get provenance if you need it. If you want to even reach out to the auction house and say, hey, where did this piece come from? Who had it before? If they can
Mm,
answer that for you and they're willing to, that helps.
mm-hmm.
That is a major market where there's a lot of issues. I will say that.
Okay.
Where you don't have that
Uh,
problem of buying a graded card, typically.
okay. Um, this is kind of like a, I mean, you did a whole video recently on like Funko Pops. I actually talked to someone not too recently, not too long ago, who's a sports card content person. And they were like in the Funko Pop, but they're in the Funko Pop NFTs. So they have NFTs for Funko Pops, and apparently they make these NFTs, and then some of them sell, and then they destroy them. Some of them, the rest of them, and then they make physical items for this. And he has like the NFT, but also the physical item. I was like, what? Is this just like the other Funko Pops, but just more mass produced scarcity? Or
It is, yeah.
okay.
One thing I'm going to say is, and again, I got to tread carefully here. This is my opinion, so I will
Hmm.
word it that way. Funko really takes advantage of their base. And I hate to say this, a lot of their base, not all, but a lot of the hardcore collectors operating in that space are very naive and gullible.
Mm,
And they're the ones that come after me and tell me I don't know what I'm talking about, simply because if a Funko Pop is based on a popular licensee like Star Wars or Disney or DC Comics or Marvel or Pokemon, that means in X number of years down the line, a Pokemon collector or a Star Wars collector is going to want to go after that item. And it doesn't work that way. We saw
mm,
this with Pez. By that same logic, nothing that is based on a pop culture license would ever hit the bargain bin if that was the case. It would all be prized collectibles. And we know that's
mm,
not true. We know it. Because if you go back to the 70s and 80s when Star Wars first premiered, not everything with Star Wars branding on it from that era is worth money today.
mm,
It's just from a logical standpoint, it doesn't work that way. And that's why I kind of feel very sad, because I know I kind of, how do I want to say this? Due to the way that YouTube works, some of my videos I have to add a little bit of humor. No one's going to just sit there and watch me talk, just giving facts. You know what I mean?
yeah.
And in that particular sphere, I tend to kind of sometimes go off the deep end. And a lot of people think that I'm insulting them because they collect
Yeah.
that product. I'm not. I'm trying to help them.
Yeah.
Because if you're putting significant amounts of money in that market, thinking that's always going to be a stable market or a stable secondary market for Funko Pops and items of that nature, you're
Hmm.
doing yourself a disservice. Again, I have nothing against the collectors, the people that are just buying it because they like it, who are passionate towards those items. But when you start to call yourself a serious investor in that market, that's where I have concerns, because that
Mm,
market isn't ripe for investing. That market is
mm,
only ripe for short term speculation. And every study I see, we see people going after these products. And immediately when the price goes up, there's a certain amount of these collectors that go, well, it's going to go higher. I'm not going to sell yet.
mhm,
When in reality, if they sold, they would have been able to at least capture those gains and then move
mhm,
on to something else. That's what's sad. And believe it or not, Funko also owns Mondo posters. If you ever heard of Mondo, they make
I'm
limited
familiar.
edition poster runs. They also own a record pressing factory. I mean, they're involved in all this speculative stuff. And it's very interesting where somebody like me, with both who's educated in business and the antiques and collectibles trade, and
Mhm,
see there's a major problem here.
mhm.
Their own consumer base doesn't see it. And that's what makes it very sad. Did you ever see, did you get Netflix?
I just know people, and I just like borrow their account if I want to watch something.
Fair enough. I won't say anything if you won't. Probably the smart way to do it. There's a show on there called Pez Outlaw, and it's a documentary about what happened with Pez speculation and how one man was able to capitalize on it, but at the end, he pretty much lost everything.
Mm,
Watch that particular documentary. It's very
okay.
good. It is a little corny. I'm not going to warn you. It is very corny
Okay.
because the person it's based off of is extremely eccentric and corny,
Okay.
but it's well worth watching.
Okay. Yeah. It's funny enough. There's a person in my lab, um, and they used to work at a Pez factory or whatever.
Really?
And yeah, and they said their boss would hoard all these Pez dispensers. uh and she's like, yeah, I wish I would have. She was like, oh, I wish I would have kept a bunch of stuff, and because it could be worth money one day. And I was like, maybe you're just saving yourself some time and space.
That
um
market's been in a downturn for decades now.
this is another thing before I go into like the NFT blockchain questions or whatever. Are there any cars from the junk wax era that are actually worth investing in? The only things that come to my mind is like
Probably going to nail them. Go ahead.
Shaq Beam Team cards or whatever. Like his highest grade for Beam because of Shaquille O'Neal, and that's probably the best card for his rookie cards you can get. And then maybe I don't know, I don't remember if PMG stuff came out around that time.
Yep.
Outside of that,
Can I be honest? You're probably going to hate me for this. I tell people just to avoid that whole era. I honestly tell
fair
them just to
enough.
avoid it, unless if you're a collector, unless if you have a thing where like you want to see what was printed during that era, you want to go to like a sports card show and you want to buy a couple of these booster boxes just to own, just for the hell of
Hmm.
it, then yes. But if you're thinking from an investing standpoint, even a speculation standpoint, I just tell people avoid that whole era. Just
Okay.
ignore it. Unless if it's again, if you're a collector, you have passion towards one of the players that premiered during that era, by all means go after it for your own sake. But
Hmm.
from an investment, no, don't touch it.
Yeah. Yeah. The only thing person I can think of was Brett Favre, and then the whole Mississippi welfare scandal thing. I was like, I'm good. So for crypto and NFTs and blockchain stuff, crazy enough, someone I do Brazilian jiu-jitsu with, a couple people that are software engineers are crazy into crypto or whatever. They one of them has like a Bitcoin. He's a nice dude. Like he has like a whole Bitcoin company. He has multiple companies. And then yeah, I don't know. He's very adamant about. Obviously, if you have a whole company built around crypto, you're probably very passionate about it. But
Sure.
uh hey, this first question, in your opinion on Top Shot and other sports NFTs and blockchain cards, what do you think
I don't
about
like it.
this stuff?
They're too
Okay.
speculative. It's a fad at present time. As a matter of fact, the bubble has kind of burst. If you
Hmm.
look at the crypto punks, is it? The
Yes.
crypto punk NFTs already started to tank. There's a lot of lawsuits out there with people that prop this stuff up, even with crypto. I used to get in arguments. People used to come on my channel, and unfortunately, I feel sorry for these individuals because they kind of got
Hmm.
scammed, but they don't understand finance and used to argue with me all the time. Shawn, I invest in crypto and I get a dividend. And it was like a company like Celsius
Oh.
that went under because what
Hmm.
they were doing is they were basically utilizing their funds to speculate on crypto. And as crypto kept going up, it was like a Ponzi scheme. They would
Hmm.
pay off some of that money to the earlier investors. And they'd be like, this is
Yeah.
great. I can get a dividend investing in crypto. And when I first heard of this, I told people, please get your money out of that. And they didn't listen to me. I was begging with people. And then when all these exchanges started blowing up, like Celsius, what is it, FTX,
Yeah.
that's when people started, well, gee, Shawn, you were right. And people ask me how I know. Well, I lived through the .com era.
Hmm.
With stocks, it was completely ridiculous.
Hmm.
Pets.com came out of nowhere. And simply because Pets.com had a website, people would put like $100 million valuation on the company.
Hmm.
It's ridiculous. We know that today. It's the same thing with a lot of these cryptocurrencies. Even
Hmm.
Bitcoin. I don't like Bitcoin because at some point, I think a more energy efficient cryptocurrency is going to be created, whether
Hmm.
it's done by the US government, whether it's done by somebody working away in a lab right now at Harvard or
Mhm.
UCLA. I don't know. But I don't like a lot of these cryptocurrencies at present time because it's too new.
Mm,
I believe in blockchain technology, even though it has limits, in my opinion.
mhm,
It's not the second coming of anything, in my opinion. It does have a
mhm,
lot of limits. But I believe in it more for commerce, for companies to utilize.
mhm,
I don't believe in it as a currency per se.
mm,
Because I don't see, like, let me use this as an example. This is the problem that I have when people argue with me. Everybody should own gold. Everybody should own silver. Everybody should own cryptocurrency.
mm.
Now, naturally, if you put a gun to my head and tell me I have to choose between gold, silver, and cryptocurrency, I'm choosing gold and silver. Okay. Cryptocurrency is way too speculative. At least I can take my gold coins, I can mint them in the coins, or I can make jewelry out of them. And gold and silver also have industrial uses. Let's be realistic.
Uh-huh.
There is a use for that.
Mhm,
But a grandma at the age of 75 or 85 isn't going into Walmart and paying for her groceries with cryptocurrency or gold or silver.
yeah.
It's completely ridiculous. And a lot of times I get cut up. I want to address this because a lot of people from the other end of the political spectrum will cut me up and they'll be like, well, you're on the left. That's why you're against all that. And I tell them, all you got to do is go look at Dave Ramsey. Dave
Mhm,
Ramsey is a hardcore libertarian person on the right. He hates
yeah,
gold, he hates silver, he hates cryptocurrency.
yeah.
It's not a political thing. I just consider it to be a stupid asset to
Mhm,
have because, again, it's completely speculative. The only reason that people are trading cryptocurrency is because they like the price volatility, where they can buy when it's down and then sell when it's up.
mhm,
If that would actually become a legitimate currency, it would have to be stabilized because nobody is going to want to potentially carry around a currency where, and I know where this is going to go. I'm going to address that in a minute. I already know what fiat currency, but nobody's going to want to carry around a currency where potentially it could be worth $50,000 for one unit at
yeah.
1 hour of the day, and then be worth $25,000 at another interval of the day. And before I know, because critics are going to scream in the comments, what about fiat currency?
Mhm,
Fiat currency is not devalued to that point ever. It is more
mm,
stable than cryptocurrency. So you can't use that argument. It is a false equivalency.
mhm,
So that's my problem with any of those markets, with any of those cryptocurrencies. I mean, I don't know if you remember. You remember the Squid Game when that came out?
yeah.
There was a cryptocurrency based on that, and people bought into it. And then people wondered, how did they get scammed? I don't understand. You bought a cryptocurrency based on the Squid Game, for crying out loud. It's like slap me in the face with a stale donut and then beat me up with with literally a wet noodle. Well, why'd you do that? Well, you told me to. It's like some of these, you know what I mean? I mean, I feel sorry for them, but a fool and his money are lucky to get together in the first place. You know, to quote from Wall Street. I,
Yeah.
I mean, what more can I do?
Yeah, it's interesting. I heard certain things about yeah, I heard certain things, certain celebrities, their own cryptocurrencies, their own NFTs, and then they end up doing a rug pull. Some of these people did a rug pull and they kind of blame the people who bought them. And then, they got criticized for it from different people. And some of the people who bought and got scammed were defending them. And I don't know. It's I don't know. It's kind of scary that I don't know. These people are human. I always worry like, what if I could do something like that?
Anybody can, apparently. I mean, it has worked for other people. I do know. What was the one? There's a guy. Is it CoffeeZilla? I think CoffeeZilla is a YouTuber that interviews like people that
Mhm.
potentially scam other individuals. And I
Yes,
think he
yes, he
did. I
does.
don't know. Don't quote me on this, but I think he did actually interview somebody that came up with a cryptocurrency and it was a scam. I think. But he's
Mhm.
interviewed so many people. It's hard to keep track. He's a great YouTuber, though. I will say that.
Yeah, I'm familiar with him. I actually started watching some of his stuff maybe 6 months ago.
Yeah.
Um Yeah, I do think he's pretty good. One thing about this whole NFT thing, and crypto thing is, does this do you think these markets affect each other? And maybe
Oh,
more so does like crypto and NFT affect like sports cards?
absolutely.
Um, okay. Because
Absolutely. Oh, go ahead.
mhm. Oh,
Uh,
okay. I was gonna say, one of the things that goes through my mind is, maybe some of these people who are spending exorbitant amounts on comic books, sports cards, stuff like that, initially made a lot of money in crypto. And then at that time, it was extremely speculative and it just paid off. And these are people who are maybe more likely, I mean, once you get rewarded for something, especially that highly, you're more likely to try to repeat it. So then these people are just going in the market, not only buying more crypto, they're buying NFTs now. They're looking for the next big thing.
that's the
And
problem, isn't it?
mhm,
Because all they're doing, it's equivalent to taking spaghetti and throwing it against the wall and seeing what sticks. And I don't know what it is. And I think it's, again, it comes down to some of the things that we talked about, lack of trust in financial
mhm,
markets, the government, but they don't want to build a true investment portfolio.
mhm,
Like I have people that come to me and I'm like, dude, go to a financial planner, call up Vanguard. You know what I mean? Start investing. And it's like,
mhm,
well, no, I don't want to do anything with stocks or financial assets. And it's like you are aware, people who have money almost unilaterally invest in the financial markets. They
mhm,
don't keep it in stupid stuff. The reason why
mhm.
they have money in stupid stuff is because they have so much money. They just diversify in everything.
Yeah.
And I think, especially younger people, and this is what really pains me because I see a lot of people wasting like years, their best years for building wealth by
Mhm,
compounding. They're just putting it in stupid stuff.
mm,
And if it doesn't work out, they find the next stupid thing. It's like they're
mm.
not learning their lesson. You would think if you get slapped in the face with a stale donut so many times, you would finally learn to avoid donuts. They
Yeah,
don't. They go on to the next donut, to the next
yeah.
donut without building any real wealth, if you get the analogy that I'm making.
I want to say it's almost like this flip culture because a lot of people want to talk about Gary Vee. I know in sports cards he brought a bunch of people in sports cards. Um,
Drives me nuts. That's all I'm going to say. I'm not a fan.
yeah, it's this thing. Yeah, it's like this flip culture, and then it's like making money fast. Yeah, it all literally reminds me of there's a lot of groups like this is mostly like young people. Even some red pill stuff, like some of the women they put on some of these podcasts or whatever, who make fast money, and they're addicted to this fast money, but it's not really helping them long term. So
Nope.
it's like it's some guys too, where you get to get or Andrew Tate stuff or whatever. It's just like you get caught up into this like, oh, make money fast, but it's like there's no real foundation. Maybe if everything's going extremely well, it's like cool, and you could maybe make a bit of money, and then you could take that and put into safer investments and be like, oh, got lucky, put in the S&P 500, learn about real estate, something more traditional. And then if depending on how much money you gain, I don't know, maybe put $500 in it, got into 25,000. You put 20,000 into traditional assets like S&P 500, and then maybe you play around with the 5,000 or whatever,
Yep.
right, or something like that. A lot of people just go, they're just like, oh, I got to go all in. I need to maximize 100%. Woo. Um, yeah, this is crazy to me. The next thing is, do you think people will collect NFTs or some sort of digital collectibles for the future? I asked this because even though I collect some cards, I'm a bit of a minimalist. I don't really like having a bunch of stuff. And I know quite a few people who are like that, who are around my age. Not everybody, but um, just cards is probably like the most that I can like have like contain, as far as even comic books seem too big and video games seem too big. So I don't know. Digital collectibles seem kind of nice in a sense, but I don't know what your opinion on that is.
I think yes, going into the future here, I think a market will exist for digital
Mhm,
collectibles, but I think it's a lot smaller than what it is now during this bubble where we have to prop up cryptocurrency, where we have to prop up NFTs. I think
mhm,
at some point the market will stabilize, be less
mhm,
fragmented, and it'll shrink down to its natural size where it's going to be going forward. Because
mhm.
there are a lot of collectors that don't like digital assets for that reason. Because if it's just sitting there digitally, what's the point? It's almost like a speculative asset because it's not paying you anything. And once it goes up in value, do you really have an emotional attachment to it?
No,
You can just click the button and sell.
yeah.
So again, it comes back to speculation.
Mm,
But I do think in the future it will be a small part of the antiques and collectibles trade. I can't see it being a major part though, because
okay.
the very essence of antiques and collectibles rests on the premise of a physical item in most cases.
Yeah.
Few exceptions.
So, like for the investment app thing, because this kind of goes into like the investment app with the Otis, the Rally, the collectible. Um, you know, I want to say this: these people doing these shares and these evaluations or whatever, and getting people to buy into, kind of like inflates the ultra high end market and the collectibles market. Is there ever a chance that these big companies could leave the sports cards, causing like a major drop in sports card prices? Because this is almost like something Vegas Dave mentioned when he made a big stint on 2 years ago when it
No,
comes
he's
to
actually correct. You,
mm,
you do have a problem because a lot of these companies are buying into this market for the sole reason of slicing up these assets and selling shares.
mm-hmm,
If that market goes away,
mm-hmm,
the products they're buying serve no real purpose for them anymore. So if they have to liquidate their holdings, they're going to get dumped on the market. If they go bankrupt, they're going to most likely liquidate those assets. Unless if they can find, now I haven't read through the fine print of how these companies are set up. It is
mm-hmm,
possible that maybe they have a plan in place, like a contingency plan, where if they would go bankrupt, somebody else would take over the assets and they would just become
mm-hmm.
part of their portfolio.
Okay.
It's just like, let me use this as an example. If you invest in Vanguard or T. Rowe Price, and let's just say by some magnificent force, Vanguard would go bankrupt.
Mm-hmm,
Even if you own an S&P 500 index fund, that is through Vanguard. I think the symbol is VOO, is the
mm-hmm,
ETF version. The assets in that fund would not go bankrupt. You
mm-hmm.
would still own that particular index, if that makes sense.
Okay.
So they may have something set up in place that's similar, but I don't see it because, again, these markets are not as regulated as the financial markets. That's
Mm,
the problem. I'm not saying that they didn't have to get SEC approval to set up like Masterworks or Rally or Otis, but I don't see them being as regulated as a mutual fund or an EFT or a stock or a bond,
mhm. Okay.
or even to a lesser extent, real estate for that matter.
Mm-hmm,
That's what makes it inherently risky. So that individual is actually 100% correct. If something would happen, or if they would not be able to sell the shares, meaning people lose interest, they listen to me and they say, well, I'm not going to get involved in that fractional investing. They don't want to go that route. Those companies cease to exist. They're no longer going into the market and buying up these collectibles because
mm,
people don't realize this. For them to get those collectibles that they have to buy them at some point.
yeah.
So they're going on in the secondary market and they're bidding up other bidders to own those pieces.
Yeah.
Well, naturally, if you have Masterworks, if you have Rally, if you have Otis, if you have any other companies, if they're all going to the market and they're all chasing the same thing, it's propping the value of these items up even higher.
Mm,
So if they disappear, it's going to affect the secondary market in a very big way.
okay. So this kind of goes into a few other things because there seems like there's absolutely everything. Now you have
Right.
Robinhood, maybe some benefits to it. There's the real estate. I think it's Fundrise. Actually, I have a little bit of money in Fundrise. I'm not gonna lie. There's art with Masterworks. Apparently, you can buy farmland on the apps.
Homeland, yeah.
Like
And what always amazes me is all these companies know who to borrow quotes from to prop up the value of these items. Meaning,
Yeah.
if somebody in Congress or a well-known business person just mentions art in passing, they use it as justification that you should invest in these particular
Mm,
companies or products. My problem is, again, you're taking an illiquid asset, you're making it even more illiquid, and then you're
mhm,
wrapping it with management fees.
mm,
It makes no sense to me. That's why I don't like Fundrise.
mhm,
I don't like Masterworks. I don't like pretty much any of these companies. There's not one that I could sit here and say, hey, invest in this rather than a total stock market index fund or an S&P
mhm.
500 index fund. And if you tell me, well, Shawn, I already have $100,000 in an S&P 500 index fund. I want to put 10,000 in Fundrise or Masterworks. You know what I would tell you?
Mm.
Put $110,000 then in an S. It's that bad. Seriously, I don't like them at all.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
find no reason for the average person to invest in them.
Mhm,
The only thing I will give credence to is if you are a major institutional investor or an investment company and you
mhm,
need to diversify like tens of millions of dollars,
mhm,
then perhaps you should look at those companies. But here's my statement: if you are in that position, if you already have tens or hundreds of millions of dollars, you don't need to invest in Masterworks. You can go to the
mhm.
market and buy a rare painting
Yeah.
and then slice it up yourself
Yeah.
and sell shares. Again, there's no purpose for these companies to exist. They prey on the gullibility of people that keep saying, "Oh, I want to be like that guy and invest in art," not
Mm,
realizing that guy can afford to invest in that type of art. He's not going through Masterworks. He's going to the market and paying a premium to own this particular piece, and he understands the risks of owning it. Here's a
mm,
misconception. A lot of people think, and this is something that blows my mind. I had to learn this the hard way. A lot of people seem to think that when like a billionaire goes to the market and pays like an exorbitant amount, like $250 million for a painting,
mhm.
in most cases, he's not taking that home and hanging it on a wall.
Yeah.
That particular piece is getting created and it's being put in a climate controlled, secure storage facility where no one's going to ever even look at it.
Mhm,
And you try to explain that to people, they don't understand, because if little Timmy wants to spend $50,000 on a graded video game, he
mhm,
wants to put it on his shelf in his $80,000 house and look at it every day. That's the difference in mentality.
mhm,
And this comes back to what we spoke about in the beginning of this video about the differences between a speculator, a collector, and an investor.
mhm,
An investor doesn't need to control or look at something on a daily basis to appreciate it or understand they own it.
mhm,
People, though, that tend to have a speculator mindset, they want to have 100% control of it. It's
mhm.
like the old person that doesn't trust banks or thinks everything's going to go to zero, that invests in gold and they put it in a safe in their basement. And every day they go and they check on their gold. Most people who have mutual funds or who have a rare coin sitting in a safety deposit box, we don't need to check on it on a daily basis or even a
Yeah.
weekly basis or even in some cases a monthly basis.
Yeah.
We know it's there. Difference in mentality.
Mm. I'm we're almost done with questions now. There's the sports car influencer one. So well, we kind of touched on this. So do you think if cards keep going down, most of these content creators will either quit making content or leave the hobby to get a corporate job, or continue to like hype up the type content, or try to pivot to being collectors and forget they were ever hype machines?
Well, here's the problem. The people that gave bad advice,
Mm-hmm.
they're the ones that are going to have the problem.
Mm,
That makes sense. I
mm-hmm.
don't think, and I could be wrong on this. It depends on who they are and what they did and how bad it was. But why would you listen to somebody that keeps giving you bad advice if you're not making any money, you're not getting any gains out of that? Even on my channel, I don't give collectible advice. I pretty
Mhm.
much teach the dynamics and the fundamentals that you need to understand so that you can make your own decisions.
Mhm.
I even tell people, if you come to my particular YouTube channel, I expect nothing but your time.
Mhm.
All you got to do is watch videos. You don't have to use my consulting services. You don't have to give me any money on Patreon if you don't want to.
Mhm.
All is what I ask is that you watch my videos with an open mind and you make your own decisions. Maybe the channel isn't for you. Maybe it is for you.
Mhm.
So when we look at it from that standpoint, I think the individuals that gave bad advice in capitalism, they deserve to fail, right?
Yeah.
They couldn't do what they promised to do.
Yeah.
Now, really, we got to look at though, is their fan base and is the market, how is that going to play out?
Mhm.
Because sometimes people forgive people when they shouldn't, simply
Mhm.
because, again, they have an emotional attachment to these items. And it's like, well, I still want to buy in. I really like his content and I want to believe in what he's telling me.
Mhm.
Do you ever wonder like how some of these people like on dating sites or whatever get scammed? Like how
Yeah.
they continually get scammed where it's like, dude, you're sending somebody you never met like gift cards or money, and it's like never leading to anything. It's
Yeah.
almost like because they invested just a little bit up front and got scammed, they now need to believe in it. Because if they believe that they were scammed, now they feel like an idiot.
Yeah.
So $50 turns into $500, which turns into $5,000, which turns into $10,000, and it leads to bad things. It's the same thing with some of these individuals. I hate to say that. So it's going to be interesting to see where this goes because I know what you mean. There are people out there that gave very bad advice, very bad information. And again, I don't call anybody like that out in my channel. I just say, this is the way you should analyze these markets. Be cautious of what people tell you.
Mhm.
So it could go either way. What I think is interesting, though, is just because the market contracted, we're not in the period where we were with the pandemic. There's still
Mhm.
opportunity there. It
Mhm.
still is a market. People still collect this stuff. What I think is happening on YouTube and TikTok in particular is there's too much hype driven content that is being pumped out on a daily basis. Where
Mhm.
if you really get into these markets, you're going to come to the conclusion that do we really need 7,000 channels devoted to collectibles, whether it's
Mhm.
sports cards, Magic the Gathering, Pokemon. And a lot of these people are just being propped up because the individual people that are watching them really, in all honesty, they want to believe in what they're saying.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of misconceptions. Like if you talk to these people, these individuals that flock to some of these channels, their perception of how that person got their money or what that person knows is usually
Yeah.
completely flawed. Like there's a
Yeah.
lot of individuals that are operating in these markets, and I'm not going to say names, who came into these markets already extremely wealthy.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, look at all I have. I can show you how to invest in these markets. When all is what they did was they had $10 million. They took 200,000 of it, spent it on collectibles. And now, because they're generating X number of views, they're getting how much in ad revenue per month?
Mhm.
10,000, $20,000.
Mhm.
Well, $20,000 a month, that's 240 grand a year. That
Yeah.
pretty much pays for their $200,000 collection there.
Yeah.
How smart are they?
Yeah. Yeah. And then, yeah, could be sponsorships. And then some of these, let's say, sports card companies say, oh, they got a lot of views, a lot of eyeballs. Let's do some kind of partnership. And
Like
it's,
even me, I get contacted by companies and they're like, "Hey, we want to partner with you." And I'm like, "No, you don't," because I'm going to tell the truth about your product. Now, again, I would take a partnership like if Vanguard reached out or
yeah.
something that I really believed in, even Heritage Auctions. If Heritage
Okay.
Auctions ever contacted me and said, "Hey, Shawn, would you do a promo for us?" I would say absolutely.
Hmm.
Even knowing that some of my core audience does not like Heritage Auctions, I would still do that
Hmm.
because I at least believe in what they're doing as an auction company,
Hmm.
regardless if I don't agree with everything they do. But I gotta laugh. Like that's why I laugh at some of these like smaller channels. It's like they get to like 5,000 subscribers, and all of a sudden it's like, well, we're gonna prop up this, or this company reached out to me. I'm gonna take the $200 and just sell my soul to the proverbial devil. And it's like it's ridiculous. What are you doing, dude? If you're truly building a base, you're going to stay true to your own values and morals.
Yeah.
I've been preaching the same thing on my channel since day one, that these markets are highly risky, they're
Hmm.
speculative. And in most cases, in all honesty, if you want to be successful and you don't know anything about the antiques and collectibles trade, you don't know anything about business, economics, and finance, you'd be better off just seeing a certified financial planner and just forgetting about attempting to invest in these markets.
Hmm.
I've seen so many lives destroyed by antiques and collectibles. And people sit there and they go, how can you say that as a consultant in the trade? And I tell them, because I am a consultant in the trade, that's how I can tell you that. I've seen
Hmm.
divorces, I've seen bankruptcies. It's horrible.
Hmm. In this last year and a half, maybe 2 years now, we're starting to see like a rise in like critical content in a sense that seem to counterbalance that most of these content creators I actually talk to. So I guess what do you make of this, and do you think does this have a negative effect on sports car prices? I mean, some of these channels are pretty small, though. I mean, sports car radio may be one of the larger ones, I guess. But um, yeah, I think. Do you even think it's does it even matter, or is it necessary? Like, I guess what's your thought on this? Just more critical content is almost like the reverse, but also it's like it's also a lot of conspiracy theories like
Right.
content in a sense as well. Like it's pretty much like almost like red pill sports card content.
No, you're not wrong. It is. It really is. And there's a lot of material out there that's being marketed in such a way where it's kind of a turnoff in certain ways, you know?
Hmm.
Don't get me wrong, it's both good and bad, but it does affect it's affecting the market, make no mistake.
Hmm.
I mean, it's completely ridiculous. That's one thing that I'm glad that didn't occur in the 1980s and 90s. You really didn't have this part of the trade where it's what I call flash and cash.
Hmm.
It's like people go on YouTube and they show this stuff off, and people go, "Oh my God, I want to be like that guy. I want to have that." And he has all that because he has that. And that's really what props the market up. And people do stupid things thinking that their life is going to change because they own an antique or a collectible. It doesn't work that way.
Hmm.
And that's the problem that I have with a lot of hype driven material.
Hmm.
And people really put out this idea that these markets are safe. They're not safe, they're completely speculative. It
Hmm.
doesn't matter what market you're now, some are worse than others, obviously. If you're going to invest in Funko Pops versus that of like rare coins, the market for Funko Pops is like a million times more speculative than that of rare coins or comic
Hmm.
books. Even. So I think that all this hype material is just causing chaos in the market overall. I
Hmm.
honestly do. Because the average person needs to be taught how to analyze these markets.
Hmm.
And most of them were never taught that. And when I do videos like that in my channel, believe it or not, they get very low views. People don't want to learn.
Hmm.
People just want to be told, buy this and you'll be okay. It's again, it's like a security blanket.
Hmm.
That's why, like,
Hmm.
if you look at finance, the finance channels that pretty much teach people how to analyze financial instruments, they're considered boring. And
Hmm.
even if they get to 100,000 subscribers, they have very slim growth prospects. After they get
Hmm.
to that point, nobody wants to watch them anymore.
Hmm.
But you put Meet Kevin out there or Graham Stephan that
Yeah.
shows you like a $10 million home
Yeah.
or a crazy car, giving stock picks and that. No offense to those guys, but the YouTube algorithm goes nuts for those people. And I hate to say this, they're not always giving the best advice.
Yeah. This this is something I've kind of always been familiar and just different things. You see this thing in dating in a sense now. We have the whole red pill thing, and then people I don't know more things about how to like actually have a successful relationship and marriage or whatever.
Oh
Um,
yeah. And we,
that,
we
that, that
can go down this path. I don't mind. I'm very
okay.
familiar with red pill content. You don't, I'm not a red pillar. I am completely
Okay.
against it, but we can go down this path. It's okay if you're trying to pull
Okay.
back a little. I'm okay discussing this. I will tell you, my problem with the whole red pill thing is it kind of teaches men to be very promiscuous and get
Yeah.
involved in a lot of short-term relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And my concern is there's a lot of men that get pulled into this toxic community because they don't have success with women.
Mm-hmm.
And they think that, well, if I have money, if I do this, if I go to the gym, if I have a side hustle, it's going to give me success with women. And I
Mm-hmm.
can assure you that is not guaranteed. And my
Mm-hmm.
question always is, what happens if those men that were promised all this under a false pretense, they get involved in this community, they start working on themselves, but they're only working on themselves to get women. If that
Mm-hmm.
doesn't materialize, guess what? We've created more incels, more than
Yeah.
men that are able to function as constructive beings in society. And if you look what women are saying, women are not attracted to red pill men.
Yeah.
All you got to do is watch any content or speak, actually interact, go out and date and
Yeah.
interact with women. And you're going to come to that conclusion. The only women that these men are attracting are either insecure women, or I hate to
Yeah.
say this, women on, I don't know if you may know this term because you're involved in psychology, the cluster B spectrum. Your
Yes.
histrionic, borderline, narcissistic, sociopathic women.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then what's happening? They're having a bad experience with these women and they're going back into the dating pool or they're communicating with other men. Well, all women are like this.
Mm-hmm.
Feminism did this. This woman did me wrong. Well, the reason why that woman did you wrong is because you didn't vet her properly. You allowed
Mm-hmm.
that to come into your life because you were going to get laid. You wanted sex. So you exchanged sex for that insanity. Was it worth it?
Mm-hmm.
That's why I think what a lot of men need is, and I hate to say this because this is unpopular, therapy. Therapy works wonders because if you're attracted to crazy, promiscuous chicks, that happened in your childhood. There's something, either you were raised by a narcissist, you
Yeah.
did not have a good upbringing with your parents, and you're going into the dating world. I have experience with this firsthand.
Mm-hmm.
You're going into the dating world and you are trying to mirror that relationship that you had with your primary caregivers. And if that wasn't healthy, you're going to seek out unhealthy people. It's based on attachment theory. That's what it
Yeah.
all comes down to. Most red pill men that I encounter, most of these guys, whether they're pickup artists, even those in the black pill community, the incels, they all have an insecure attachment style.
Interesting.
And what the red pill does is it teaches you to have a more avoidant attachment style because
Mm-hmm.
they think that's what women want, the dismissive avoidant. The
Mm-hmm.
guy who's the alpha, who's so focused on himself, where he doesn't show his emotions, he feels no vulnerability. You can't sustain a long-term relationship in that
Mm-hmm.
mindset or that behavior. And women that get involved with those men, they end up dropping those men very quickly if they're
Mm-hmm.
even attracted to them at all. That's my problem with the red pill in a
Mm-hmm.
nutshell.
Yeah, I think you did a very accurate description of what was going, yeah, what's going on.
But
Yeah,
did you ever see The Luckiest Girl Alive?
did I see the luckiest girl alive? I don't think I've
It's a
seen that.
Netflix movie.
Okay.
Luckiest Girl Alive is, I'm going to tread carefully here. It's about a woman. I think it's played by Muna. I can't pronounce her name. She used to date, I don't know if she's still with him, Ashton Kutcher at some point.
Okay.
Mina Kurt, I forget her name. But anyway, she went through a ton of trauma. She was sexually assaulted in
Mm-hmm.
high school. She went through a school shooting. So naturally, she has a lot of core trauma.
Mm-hmm.
So she gets into the dating world. And in that movie, she ends up getting with the stereotypical alpha guy.
Mm-hmm.
And by the end of the movie, she works through her trauma, she heals. And what do you think the first thing she does is? She breaks up with that guy. Pretty
Yeah.
much. And that's what a lot of these red pillars don't understand. The women that they're attracting have a lot of core trauma or have issues.
Mm-hmm.
And they're applying their experiences to all women. They're painting a wide brush saying that all women are like this. That is not true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That's a good thing. I think this is probably like one of my last questions as far as like sports car stuff. Uh there's this big thing about Kirk's Card Care. So I don't know, and there are other services like Kirk's Card Care. They basically offer like card buffering services where they can restore cards and they could, yeah, I mean, I guess, and I guess they sell kits too. They maybe they can do it themselves, but also they can have kits where, I mean, I guess there's some success stories where a card that's rated PSA 9, you go through cursed card care and they're PSA 10, or would improve the previous grade of the card. Do you think, because there's mixed views on this. I was probably the people who are using cursed card care and getting better grades and putting in for grading and making more money probably like it, but other people are like, I don't think this is ethical.
Okay. Throughout the entire history of graded collectibles, there have always been ways to try to make an item better than what it actually is. I mean,
Mm.
even back in the day, I don't know if you know what coin dipping is.
Coin dipping? That sounds like something where you probably alter the outside coating of it to make it look more shiny and make nicer or whatever.
What used to happen is you would come across a coin, and the market at that particular point in time would cater to coins that look like they just came off the minting press, meaning
Hmm.
last white coins is what they would be called. Well, if you dip a coin that had toning on it or any unattractive surface like hazing, toning, whatever it was, you could dip the coin in acetone, and it would actually take away the impurities and it would leave a blast white coin for you.
Ah.
Now, if there were any deep defects, like any hardcore scratches, anything like that, that would still remain on the coin.
Hmm.
So dipping wasn't seen as completely negative because every coin dealer back in the day did it. It was actually quite dangerous, though. There were
Hmm.
stories of coin dealers that actually died trying to dip coins because they did something stupid. Like one particular case in particular, this is amazing. Guy was drinking ginger ale in a glass, and he had acetone in a glass next to it where he would dip the coin. And he wasn't thinking. He picked up the acetone and ended up drinking it as opposed to the ginger ale. And there is one reported case that the dude died as a result of this. So I have to bring that up because it is quite hilarious in a morbid sense when you look at this. But even if we look at comic books, the biggest thing, I remember when CGC first came onto the scene, comic book
Hmm.
pressing.
Oh yeah.
You take a comic book, you press it under a lot of weight, and you can kind of, if you're lucky enough and you have the right kind of defects that aren't color breaking, you can pretty much press the defects out and make the book a higher grade than what it is.
Mm.
Even in action figures, there's ways to clean a card back or a bubble on a particular factory sealed figure. So there's always been these ways to try to enhance the appearance of these items before you get them graded. So I don't have a problem with that. I have a problem with, though, some of these mom and pop shops coming
Hmm.
into existence claiming they can do it better or they can sell you a to-do kit to make it
Uh,
better. That to me sounds a little bit too far because even if we talk about coin dipping or comic book pressing or action figure cleaning, most of that is done by professionals where you pretty much have
uh,
to send it to that professional. They will do whatever they need to do to it, and then they'll send it to the grading company.
okay.
That's why today, like, I don't know if you're aware of the CGC, Comics Guarantee Corporation. They actually have their in-house pressing division.
Oh.
You can send comics to them to be pressed and then graded.
Okay.
Not seen as restoration.
Oh. Huh.
With card, though, with any type of card doctoring, I really don't agree with because it blurs the line there a little bit if some of these mom and pop shops are going to do it or if they're going to sell you a kit. Now, to be fair, I know what my critics are going to say. Well, Shawn, there are third party pressers out there for comic books or whatever. I get that.
Hmm.
But I don't like it.
Do you think, because and for sports cars, there's like four grading companies right now. Do you think that it's gonna be less? Because generally speaking, it used to be mainly PSA and BGS, and then I guess SGC for some vintage stuff.
Yep.
Um, but now it's three on the scene, and it does seem like PSA is gonna stay, and for at least for sports cars is CSG, but for TCG is CGC. And it seems like even though they're newer to grading cars, they have so much experience with comic books, and I think I don't know BlackRock owns them or something. So it seemed like maybe they have staying power, but CGC and like BGS could be in danger. so I don't know, like, what's your thought process? Do you think it's possible that um in the future there's going to be only two really major grading companies, or do you think all four would stay, or I don't know what your thought process is on this?
I think eventually there'll be a shakeout. Right now, though, I will tell you, CGC is owned by the Certified Collectibles Group, which
Okay.
also owns NGC. They own PMG, which grades paper money. They own a lot of other companies. And you are correct. They are owned indirectly by both Jay Z, believe it or not, and
Hmm.
BlackRock.
Okay.
It's Blackstone or BlackRock, if I remember correctly. It's one of them. And as a result, they are probably one of the most trusted source for third party grading. So I don't see them
Mm,
going away, but I do see them attempting to mount a defense against BGS and PSA. Do I think that they'll overtake PSA? No. Do I think that they can
mm,
overtake BGS? Yes.
mm,
That's where this comes into play. I think that they're vying for the secondary spot.
mm,
Now, what's going to happen to some of these other companies? Some are eventually probably going to go the way of just not being relevant anymore.
mhm,
I mean, if we go back all the way and we look at coin grading, there were multiple companies that graded coins. Multiple. Today, there's only two top tier companies, and that's PCGS and NGC.
mhm,
Now, you can bring up CAC. CAC is a little bit of a outlier because they were pretty much a company that just graded third party graded coins from PCGS and NGC. Well, now they're going full fledged third party.
mhm.
So there's probably going to be a shakeup in that market too. But I don't think you're ever going to dethrone like CGC or NGC or any of these companies that are affiliated with the Certified Collectibles Group, simply because they are so well funded and capitalized
Mhm,
that even if they're not a top tier company, they can afford to play in that market, even if they remain second fiddle or even third fiddle.
mhm.
It's going to be some of the others that are going to go by the wayside. And it's just like PSA. PSA is still owned by the Collectors Universe.
Yeah.
Collectors Universe also owns PCGS coin grading.
Mm,
They're so well funded that it's not going to matter. They'll still be relevant for that reason.
okay.
They can make themselves relevant at that point.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like it's a problem. Some of these people holding cars long term,
It is.
whatever, and then this car grading company becomes completely irrelevant, and it's like, all right, then you got to regrade. It's just,
Well, that's what makes it extremely risky.
yeah,
I brought that up before. Like if they come out with a new grading sale, even just like the plus moniker that a lot of companies now use. Like people don't realize this.
yeah.
Back when they started grading coins in the 1980s, there was no plus grades. You either got a coin, and let's just say that you're a high end collector, it came back either MS 64, 65, or 66. Now, if you get an MS 64, if that coin's valued at thousands of dollars, if you can send it back into the grading company and they put a plus sign on it, you just scored an additional $500,000 in your pocket.
Mm,
So why wouldn't you take the chance and grade it again?
yeah. The I've noticed this with sports cards. For certain people or certain groups, like you can send to PWCC, and then you get this like eye appeal thing.
Oh
They've
God,
been
yeah.
doing it for like modern cards too. Like maybe for vintage it may make sense, but like for modern cards, it's like top 15% eye appeal. They put these stickers on there, and then some of it's like gold, and then there's that, and the other one is like Steve Aoki collection or something, or like this famous person owned it.
Yeah.
Like, is that gonna be like a staying something that's gonna have staying power and they're gonna be a thing in the future? Or you think this is just
Well,
like
that came out of rare coins. That's what CAC eventually did. That was the whole
oh,
purpose
okay.
of CAC. CAC basically kept NGC and PCGS honest in their grading. Meaning, if you would send them a coin that was graded like MS64 or MS65, and they would look at it and they would go, "Hey, we agree with this grade. This is fairly strong for the grade. We're going to sticker the coin." And they send it back with a sticker. That means they agreed with the grade given. If they didn't sticker it, they sent it back that it wasn't stickered CAC. That meant they didn't agree with the grade. They found the
Okay.
problem with that coin. So I think all companies are starting to go in that direction, all grading markets, whether it's comic books, whether it's currency. whether it's sports cards, even toys, I think at some point will.
Mm-hmm.
Will it catch on? I think it's necessary for coins. I don't think it's necessary for a lot of these other markets.
Okay.
The markets aren't that sophisticated. Meaning when you look at a coin, you can have two different coins that are
Mm-hmm.
graded by the same company with same mint mark, everything's the same about them. And you send them in the market, and one of those coins can sell for a significantly higher amount just because of eye appeal or lack of toning or because it has toning. With sports cards, you really don't have that.
Mm.
You have centering to worry about, but the
Mm-hmm.
grading company already takes that into account. So I know that there's going to be people that disagree with me on that, but I just don't see it being as prominent as coins
Mm.
in that sense. Like even currency. Currency doesn't require that. That's ridiculous. Because in order to get like any of the high grades in currency, you already have to have perfect centering.
Yeah.
If you're going to the market and you're buying a PMG 65 with EPQ, exceptional paper quality, well, you don't need any other grading notation on it. It already has fairly good centering for it to get that grade. It doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah. I think I have just a couple more questions left. So this is something I've heard people talk about. Have you seen people develop an addiction to cards or in other collectibles? Because this is something people have been talking about, whatever this sports card addiction or whatever. I know when I was a kid, as far as Yu-Gi-Oh, that was probably the closest thing to addiction I've ever had. Where yeah, you just had to get it was a literal obsession. But yeah, you kind of mentioned this before. Maybe people you said people may have some kind of attachment issues, but have you really seen like or any particular stories that you haven't told before about like addictions you've seen in cards or collectibles?
Yes, there's tons of addictions in these markets. A lot of
Okay.
the people that are playing in this market have an addiction and they call themselves investors
Mm,
because guess what? They want to justify logically what they're spending money on. So if
mm,
you look at this as an investment rather than a collectible or a speculative asset, now, well, I can't lose. I'm investing
mm-hmm,
like the stock market.
mm-hmm,
And that's the problem that I have. I have so many people that come to me and they go, "Well, Shawn, what's the difference if I'm buying like a whatever it is? Like I'll use comic books as an example, a Conan one or a Ghost Rider one or a share of Dow Chemical or a block of shares of Iron Mountain." And I have to tell them the difference is I don't tell people to invest in individual stocks.
mm-hmm,
I tell them to invest in mutual funds, index-based
mm-hmm,
mutual funds. You can't do that in the collectibles trade.
mm,
Don't let anybody tell you different. These are not on par with those type of assets.
mm-hmm,
So that's the problem. People do want to believe these are investments. So when you tell them that they have a problem, well, I'm investing. That's the excuse they give.
mm,
It's just like on the other end of the equation, there's people that have an addiction to shopping that
yeah.
discover these markets. And they just
Oh,
need to spend money, but then they go, well, it's an investment. I'm investing. And it's like, really? That $15,000 Citigroup bill that you just got in the mail from Citibank, that was an investment? Paying 9% or 10% or hell, 12%, 18% on this stuff? Come on. So yeah, it's a major problem. And as a matter of fact, I guarantee you a lot of shrinks, a lot of people in the mental health space see a lot of this where it crosses the bar in the hoarding and obsession.
yeah,
Sad.
yeah. That's I guess one thing we kind of alluded to it. You know, a lot of people have bias in these markets, especially if I mean you're gonna put all this money, you need to have some kind of justification. Like, if people are going to get involved in this, what can they do to avoid biases or avoid the group think and avoid I don't know these psychological issues that happen where really confirmation bias like are there ways you've seen people have been been able to stay successful and avoid the confirmation bias in a sense.
Absolutely. They have to learn their own relationship with money first.
Okay, so
They should
psychology and
already have an
manipulation.
Yeah, they should already have an understanding of business, economics, finance, and they should be able to detach themselves from the emotional attachment to these items so they don't make mistakes like that. And most
Mm-hmm,
people I have seen cannot do that.
mm-hmm,
And that's how you set yourself up for success if you're going to be an investor in these items. I've seen marriages destroyed. I've seen businesses destroyed. I've seen people go bankrupt. I've seen people even get involved in the hardcore crime to pay for their addictions to antiques and collectibles. I mean, it's that bad. I've seen people spiral out of control with drug use because they spent so much money and now they know their lives are destroyed. I mean, at the end of the day, it's almost like a lot of these collectible dealers, I hate to say this because I'm involved in this too. It's almost like they're peddling crack. I'm serious. That's why these companies can make so much money. I hate to say it. If you look at what some of these companies are pulling in, like even Heritage Auctions, go look at what they made last year. It's in the billions.
oh,
Sotheby's, Christie's it's insane when you break this down. Even
mm-hmm,
eBay, even smaller auction houses, it's basically selling an idea, a concept, an abstract thing that represents something to someone else. It's not
mm-hmm.
even real. And
Yeah.
I try to tell people that none of this is real. You have an emotional attachment to nostalgia. It's not the item itself, it's that time period. And they don't understand that. So they get really, really looped into this. It's sad.
Yeah, yeah, that's very difficult. Yeah, it's this weird thing where everybody wants to do this alternative investment. I actually talked to I had a conversation with someone who does does Pokemon tubing or what about Pokemon cards or whatever, and their excuse was they're like, well, what else am I supposed to invest in? Invest in like the S&P 500 to get average returns, and I'm like, you're probably gonna do better than most people just because like most people aren't doing that.
Correct. Over
So
the long term, you would.
uh and I was like, all right, like
Yeah. No, I see what you're saying. We didn't touch on this really. The
mhm,
antiques and collectibles trade, from an investing standpoint, has one of the most out of whack wealth inequality ratios than almost any economy out there. And people don't realize that. Most people that attempt to invest in these markets, you have a 97% chance of losing money at any given
yeah.
time. And people don't realize that. And they think like buying an S&P 500 index fund and holding it over the long term is risky. No,
Mhm,
investing in this stuff is risky. It's
mhm,
a very small percentage of people that are actually able to go into these markets and make a profit over and over again.
mhm.
And I mean, if you would be able to do that in the stock market, you'd be considered Warren Buffett. I mean, let's be
Yeah.
honest. You would be a baller at that point. You'd be somebody that really knows how to grind and make money. In these markets, very few people can do it. That's why if you don't believe me, I always tell people there's tons of collecting Facebook groups out there
Mhm,
or reselling Facebook groups like eBay thrifters or Lego investing. Just see, just go on those forums and see how much money those people are making. It's not as
mhm,
much as you think. A lot of them are really desperate, and a lot of those people eventually do come across like a collection that's valuable, but it's like a once in a several year opportunity.
mhm,
Of course, they post about it. It's very hard to do that consistently.
mhm.
Very hard.
Yeah, yeah, most of the people who are like the most successful, it seems like, yeah, you mentioned before, they came in a lot of money, already from other businesses and things.
Got it.
And some of the biggest people, I'm kind of somewhat name drops, the Gary V's of the world, sports card investor, Vegas Day, people like that. They're
Well, does
successful enough.
anybody ever really analyze like some of the videos that he puts out? Like I see these on Facebook Reels or even I think TikTok and YouTube. Does anybody believe that he's actually going to yard sales? I mean, I don't know if I believe that. I honestly, I know the footage is out there. I know that people are going to tell me, Shawn, that's insane. Of course he goes, look at the videos. But you know how much money he has? Why would I don't know. Even me, I very rarely go to yard sales anymore. And
Yeah,
I don't have the type of money that Gary Vee has. I mean, I do okay, but I'm not up there in like hundreds of millions.
yeah, yeah,
So I kind of have a problem where when like some of these guys like they take a phone with them and they record going to a yard sale buying like $5 items and telling people you can flip them for $10 when it's like, dude, you have $100 million sitting in the bank. Does that make sense? I just doesn't anybody ask why is that I know his videos get a lot of views. I get it.
yeah,
It's meant to motivate people. I understand
yeah.
that. But it just seems so ridiculous to me. Like, am I really supposed to fall for that?
He's like this. It's weird because this is weird because I was actually in the motivational space. I was like really interested in stuff. I've gone to a couple Tony Robbins conferences and stuff like that. Um, I I'm not one of those naive people. I think 98 to 97% of the people are like snake oil salesmen, and then there's probably like three a minimum amount of people who are actually trying to give real advice and actually trying to help people. If you listen to it, your life will be better. But uh, yeah, I think he kind of got lumped into that kind of space, and there's a lot of money in the like motivational speaking space. Like it's a at least a $10 billion industry, and I think it's expected to grow by a lot more.
It
And
is.
one of the things is part of his brand is like just do practical things and do simple things, and people overcomplicate their life. And I guess people make excuses and stuff. So there have been multiple times where he's been on podcasts, and people are like, "What are you talking about? You have hundreds of millions of dollars. Like the average person or below average person who's struggling to pay bills, they're not going to be able to make money." And this whole thing of being people are entitled and they're not really to make sacrifices and do the work. And then it kind of, I think it was like the Breakfast Club or something. It's like, well, what are people going to do? And he just out of the blue came up with something, yard sales or whatever, and then you could buy stuff and flip it. And then I guess he was trying to like do things to kind of prove
Yeah.
um and that a lot of people, because I used to listen to his stuff. I don't really listen much to his stuff now, but um that I guess the thought process is that even like people who become very successful, they kind of get lazy and stuff, and they lost the hunger and stuff when they were didn't have any money. And I don't know, I guess he's just trying to keep that alive, and I guess he believed that kind of mentality made him successful, because he mentions that a lot of stuff that he does, I don't know how true this is, but a lot of stuff that he does, and at least in the short and the medium term, doesn't isn't like a smart business idea. But he's like, but I guess the brand that he's trying to build in the long term, it pays off, and he has enough money to like take that risk, I guess.
I
um
would agree.
I don't, yeah, I don't know. And I guess he kind of puts it off as like this is just something that he just loves to do, whether he had a bunch of money or not. um I'm pretty sure a lot of people who work for him kind of like have all these places scouted out for him. And if he does go, I don't know. Yeah, I'm not in their jersey, so and I'm not going to yard sales. Maybe if I did, maybe I would run into him, but who knows?
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, but I don't know. It still goes back to this whole thing with the flip culture thing,
Mhm.
and this whole hustle culture thing. That I feel like that could be another toxic culture in a sense, and that can kind of keep you where you at and actually keep you broke in a sense. Some of the stuff can be helpful, putting in extra work to make a little bit of money, and then maybe you can use that to gain a skill or
I
something.
I agree, but here's my problem with that.
Uh huh.
I think a lot of those people, they're giving up dollars to chase pennies. Do you ever notice
Yeah.
that? It's like
Yeah.
I have people that come to me, well, Sean, I just want to open up Pokemon cards and sell them all day. And it's like, or Lego, like Bricklink. I want to do Bricklink where I just open up Lego sets and sell the parts. And it's great. How much money you making, little Timmy? And he's like, well, I figured it out. I made $10.25 an hour the last 40 hours I did it. And it's like, you think you're going to support a family on $10.25 an hour selling Lego or Pokemon? It's like, then you tell these people they should go to college. And then that brings up a whole other ball of wax because it's like, oh my God, that's a horrible advice. That's a waste of money. That's indoctrination. They come up with it's just amazing where we are as a society right now.
Yeah, I yeah, I mean, I don't know. Most people I know do STEM, and then most people I'm like friends with, at least from undergrad, are actually starting to get married and
Yep.
starting to have their careers as a physician or pharmacy or some kind of STEM related field. I think if you do STEM, you think you're fine. Even if you do take on debt, you can pay it off, and you're most likely marriage is important, can be important for wealth growth as well. You marry the right person, and yeah, there's a lot of stuff where people a lot of traditional things have worked in the past. Maybe there's some tweaking, but it's just like people are against. Going to college is also apparently the worst thing you can do. Getting married is the worst thing you can do. Um, Having a 9 to 5 is the worst thing you can do. Like literally having a regular job is the worst thing you can do. So yeah, it's this weird thing where some people maybe it works out for a very small minority, but most people are maybe better off just doing the quote unquote average thing. Um, uh, I guess there's one more question I guess I had was like, there's been a lot of buzz with like Chat GTP and just AI in general, and people afraid of AI. Um, how much does this affects the collectibles market? And like, I don't know how much is people really using this, and I don't know if you know any specific ways.
It's
Because
not
I
being
know
used on average in the collectibles market as of yet. The problem that I have with this, and I'll answer the question because I know where you're going with this. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
it's fine.
I'm just going to state that I think eventually it could be used for bad purposes if people want to try to predict the market
Um,
or people want to ask questions from an analytical standpoint without doing their own research.
mhm,
I think that can cause problems once we get into AI and discussions about AI. And also, it can also lead, like when we talk about grading,
mhm.
as we discussed earlier, like computer grading, AI grading, any of that, that can lead to something negative, in my opinion. So I do think eventually it will hit the antiques and collectibles trade. It just depends on what form,
Mhm.
when, and how hard. It's not really there yet. I know some people will disagree with that because there are talks of certain people using it, certain companies using it. We're not there yet. But when
Okay.
we get there, it is something to be concerned about.
Okay. Yeah, because my thought process, because even in my lab, hopefully this summer I'll be able to take this course on like more machine learning stuff. But from my understanding, it seems like when with a lot of artificial intelligence, it may be very great to kind of predict and help you with things that are already known and that are predictable patterns. But it seems like in yours, whether stocks and even in these collectible markets, you really can't predict what's going to happen. So they
Yeah,
can like lead you into like a really bad situation.
correct. Because if they don't have all the data and they analyze just based on the data they have and it's not complete, you're going to get an incorrect
Yeah,
analysis. And that's what's bad about all of this. Like I
yeah,
would never trust a AI bot to tell me what stocks to buy or you know what I mean?
yeah.
It's too risky. It's just we're not there yet. I don't think we'll ever get there either.
Mm.